When a dashing officer and a beautiful deputy jailer join forces, it seems like a match made in heaven.
I think they had an attraction because they both worked in law enforcement.
He was sort of this charming guy, so they started dating, and I think she fell pretty hard.
But just when their lives seem destined for greatness, an unexpected disappearance upends their world.
There was a buzz in the city about a missing police officer.
We knew something bad probably gonna come after this.
As investigators search for answers, they'll soon find themselves plunged into uncharted waters. A place where secrets bubble just under the surface and deadly sins flow like blood.
There are drugs, there's a lot of criminal activity. Officers are often the targets of bad people.
His one vice was probably that he liked women a little too well.
He's coming towards her, and that's when it happens.
It just was a bad situation. Never should have happened.
They got away with a capital murder.
Monday, September 4th, 2006. It's Labor Day weekend in Memphis, Tennessee. All across town, families are enjoying end-of-summer barbecues. But at the home of Ethel Hayes, the absence of her beloved son, Tony, a 9-year veteran of the Memphis Police Department, is putting a damper on the festivities.
He hasn't contacted any of you and said he wasn't coming?
I hadn't talked to him today, but last I heard, he said he was coming.
She has been picking up his son and bring him to the barbecue too. And he never did show up.
That kind of alarmed the family that he didn't pick his son up because there are certain things Tony would not do, and not picking up his son was one of them. He loved his son very much.
Over the next few hours, Tony's family continues to try to track him down.
Did he answer?
Every time I call, I just get the voicemail. I'm telling you, something's not right. It's not right.
My grandma would start calling everybody that she knew that knew Tony and see could they get in touch with him.
No one knew where Tony was.
But the disappearance of Officer Tony Hayes is a mystery that's only beginning to unfold. One that'll have many wondering just who in this story was on the wrong side of the law.
We was just saying, why? How could something happen like this? Everything was just crazy.
Tony Hayes was born in 1969 in the new Chicago neighborhood of Memphis, Tennessee.
It was a low-income neighborhood, but there was a sense of pride in the community. Even though it was low-income, my parents instilled values in us.
Values that the whole Hayes family took to heart.
The Hayes family was a very loving, caring family. Mother Hayes, she did not play with her children. They knew that she was their friend, but she was also the law in that household.
In this strict yet caring environment, Tony grew up to be a model citizen.
He was just a very disciplined person.
After high school, Tony went off to the Marine Corps. He served his country during the Persian Gulf War, and I think maybe saw himself becoming a law enforcement officer.
A dream that came true after Tony left the Marine Corps and returned home to Memphis.
When Tony became a Memphis police officer, that was a sense of pride and accomplishment for him.
For the next 9 years, Tony worked some of the most dangerous beats in the city.
Tony was an undercover cop. He do his job to the fullest, and he was a hard worker.
He ultimately arose to the rank of sergeant and was proud of that accomplishment, as was his family.
But Tony's success in life extended well beyond the workplace.
No, guys, I'm gonna go there.
He also fared well with the ladies.
Good evening, ladies. How you doing?
He was about 6'1" in height and very athletically built. And it was all muscle, and it wasn't no fat. He wore nice clothes, and he was a car enthusiast. So, you know, he loved cars. He always had a nice car and kept himself up. So like I said, the ladies probably found Tony very attractive.
Like his prized cars, Tony had a soft spot for beautiful women. And over the next few years, he married twice.
He met his first wife after he got out of the military. She was drop-dead gorgeous, as was his second wife.
Though both marriages ended in divorce, there was a silver lining.
Even though the breakups were hard, Tony's second wife blessed him with a son, and that son became the light of his life.
He was very crazy about his son. It looked like he was Tony's mini-me.
He was an excellent father, spent a lot of time with his son, and really provided a great role model for that young man.
Though Tony was a loving father, he longed to have a woman in his life to help him raise young Devin. And in the spring of 2005, Tony met the drop-dead gorgeous 36-year-old Monique Johnson.
Tony Hayes met Monique Johnson while he was moonlighting as a security guard at the apartment complex where she lived.
I'm Tony.
It's really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, beautiful.
Monique would be what a lot of people considered very attractive. She described herself as light-skinned with long hair and having it going on.
Tony was really taken by her appearance.
For Monique, the attraction was mutual.
Dinner sometime?
Yeah, sure.
He was sort of this kind of charming guy, so they started dating, and I think she fell pretty hard for Tony. He would take her out to eat. They were spending every day together. He would send her flowers.
But as the couple ignited their romance, it didn't take Tony long to realize that Monique may be more than just a passing fling.
There's no doubt Monique and Tony had a lot in common.
Monique Johnson was a native of the region, had a hard upbringing, but managed to bring herself up by her own bootstraps. She was married and divorced, had 2 children.
Like Tony, Monique also shared a passion for law enforcement.
Monique worked as a deputy jailer for the Shelby County Sheriff's Department.
Having so much in common only heightened the couple's attraction to one another. But it was in the bedroom where the sparks really flew.
It became incredibly passionate, and it moved very quickly.
It was passionate, hot, and it seemed perfect. They were planning a future.
Though both Tony and Monique had tried and failed at marriage before, by the spring of 2006, the couple was talking engagement rings and wedding vows.
Tony was telling Monique, hey, one day we're going to get married and have this family.
They both believed that a part that had been missing in their lives had been completed.
In light of Tony's newfound happiness, his disappearance on September 4th, 2006 is even more concerning.
We want to know, why would he do this? Why he want to answer his phone, and why he want to call nobody and tell somebody where he at?
The following morning, Tony is absent from roll call at the Memphis Police's Union Station precinct, which makes his fellow officers extremely worried.
Has anybody seen Hayes?
By all accounts, Tony was a model officer, and when he failed to show up for his shift, alarm bells started to go off.
The police, to say the least, were taking Tony's disappearance very seriously.
But just what had happened to Officer Tony Hayes?
Try calling him again?
His colleagues and friends are determined to find out.
The Memphis Police Department was going to be very aggressive about it. We knew that it was going to be passionate for them as it was for us to seek what they thought was justice.
After a blissful year together, Deputy Jailer Monique Johnson and Police Officer Tony Hayes were already talking marriage.
Tony and Monique fell in love hard, and it was fast.
They appeared to be happy and a good match.
But now, on September 6th, 2006, Tony's been missing for more than 24 hours, and his colleagues at the Memphis Police Department are growing increasingly concerned.
The last time that his family had seen or spoken to Tony was on the afternoon of September the 3rd. He was supposed to come to a family picnic the next day, but he failed to show up.
Tony goes missing, and it does become a big deal quickly. Because of Tony's occupation, both as a police officer and the fact that he worked as security at the apartment complex, gave him exposure to a lot of volatile situations.
While Tony was missing, there were several scenarios discussed within the police department amongst his friends and family. Did someone put out a hit on Tony? Was it the result of some sort of investigation in which he was involved?
They were looking. The police were actively looking everywhere they could.
While detectives comb through Tony's arrest records in search of a lead, a team of officers execute a search of his home.
There's no evidence of foul play, but a search of his residence revealed his Lexus is missing from the garage.
Car's gone. Police were looking for those plates in that car.
By that afternoon, Tony's disappearance is the talk of the town.
Missing persons reports typically get some media coverage depending on who is missing. But when a Memphis police officer, a person in charge of protecting the community, is now missing, it certainly got our attention and was quickly on the TV news, radio news, even in the newspaper.
Though Tony Hayes' loved ones are grateful for the attention, their fears continue to mount.
I tried to be optimistic, but after a day had went by and he hadn't called his mom, he hadn't checked in on his son, it became very evident that something was wrong.
No one seems more concerned about Tony's disappearance than his beloved girlfriend, Monique Johnson.
She was expressing her worry over Tony because she had called him several times and kept getting his machine. And so she said it was very unusual because if he wouldn't call back, he would text back.
But Monique's other pressing concern is the well-being of Tony's 11-year-old son, Devin.
She decided she'd check on the son. And so she got a French fries and the hamburger and took that over.
How are you doing, kiddo?
I just wish I knew where my dad was.
Me too.
Later that evening, investigators get their first chance to speak to Monique Johnson at her home in a brand new suburban development.
When was the last time that you actually saw Tony?
Well, that would have had to have been the morning of Monday, September 4th.
She said that they went to the casinos and they stayed down there that night and that they came back and that he was going to pick up the son.
Was that the last time you heard from him?
Yes, and I went to the movies that night. When I got out, I heard that Tony had been missing.
Have you ever had any kind of problems in your relationship
No,
with Tony?
not at all. I love him so much. And I really just hope that you guys find him.
As a deputy jailer in Shelby County, Monique knew the dangers of law enforcement. She was extremely worried about Tony's whereabouts, and she was hoping that everything would turn out okay.
They checked her story out, and she had gone out to see a movie the night of Tony's disappearance.
But before detectives leave that evening, they ask Monique one last question.
One angle we're still pursuing is that his disappearance was work-related. So had he mentioned anything to you about work lately? Any issues?
Actually, there is.
Look, I ain't got time to be standing out here all night. Come on, open the door, stop playing.
She remembers something happening at the apartments where he had to pull a gun on a guy and the guy threatened him.
Yo, I need you to calm down now. Need the premises now, son. I'll see you later, partner. I'll be back.
This was the apartment complex where Tony moonlighted. So there was some fear that something could have happened there.
He was essentially off duty and alone and far more susceptible.
While detectives dispatch a team to investigate Monique's allegations, they return to their station for a scheduled meeting with some of Tony's closest colleagues.
They thought Tony's co-workers might know something about problems with former perps.
But what Tony's co-workers are about to reveal will stun detectives, leaving them to wonder if this top cop had actually been living a double life.
This isn't the kind of thing you'd expect to turn up, and detectives realized it was going to be a game changer.
Memphis police officer Tony Hayes seemed to have it all. A great career, a beautiful son, and a stunning girlfriend who set his heart aflame. But now Tony has disappeared without a trace, and detectives fear that he may have been targeted by a violent criminal with an axe to grind.
Police put themselves out there every day. Just going to work, it's possible they could be shot just for wearing the uniform.
Monique told police that Tony had recently been threatened by a guy at the apartment complex where Tony moonlighted.
But while searching for the mystery man who threatened Tony, detectives are also questioning Tony's colleagues at the Memphis Police Department.
The priority is to find Tony.
Yes.
And so I'm just here to ask you if you have anything you can share with us.
Anything could have happened to him, but his personal life is pretty complicated too.
What do you mean exactly?
That's when Tony's colleagues informed detectives that technically, Tony never officially divorced his ex-wife, Kayla Hayes.
During the investigation, Memphis PD discovers that Tony Hayes is married.
Tony's colleagues don't know, however, if Tony's wife knew about Monique or if Monique knew about Tony's wife.
At this point, detectives can't help but wonder, could Tony have been murdered by his own wife?
Thank you very much.
To answer that question, they decide to speak to Tony's wife, Kayla Hayes.
They learn that she is actually living and working in Las Vegas.
After contacting their counterparts at the Vegas PD, a local detective heads to Kayla's home.
Ms. Hayes, I'm with the Las Vegas Police Department. Do you mind if I come in and speak with you for a moment?
Is this about Tony?
Yes, it is.
Come on.
Kayla explains that a couple of days earlier, she had received word from Tony's family that he had gone missing.
When was the last time you spoke with Tony?
Honestly, it had been a while.
Kayla explains that they had been separated for about a year and 4 months. In fact, they had only been married for about 3 months before that.
We lived together in Memphis, but it was clear really early on that it just wasn't going to work out.
She said they wanted different things out of life, but apparently, Tony had a wandering eye.
His one vice was probably that he liked women a little too well. He was what could be called a player.
Were you aware he was seeing a woman named Monique Johnson?
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, we had spoken.
His wife was calling to talk to Tony. And since Monique had Tony's phone, she answered. And the wife's going, "Who are you?" And Monique's going, "Who are you?" She goes, "Well, I'm his wife." Well, that didn't sit well with Monique.
And how did you feel that he was seeing another woman?
Look, I have my life and he has his.
Kayla was adamant that she had nothing to do with Tony's disappearance and that she was in Las Vegas September 4th. And when they checked the car and flight records, her story checked out.
While Tony's wife Kayla seems innocent of any wrongdoing, her statement prompts detectives in Memphis to pay another visit to Tony's girlfriend, Monique Johnson.
They go back to Monique and they confront her about what they know at this point.
Monique doesn't deny any of it. She admits that she was furious when she found out that Tony was married.
When were you going to tell me?
Babe, listen to me.
No. When were you going to tell me? When were you going to tell me that you were married?
I'm sorry, I just didn't know how to tell you. It was over months before we met each other. Monique, it's just me and you.
According to Monique, Tony reassured her that she had nothing to worry about. Eventually, they reconciled, and since then, they hadn't had any other problems.
Detectives aren't sure what to make of Monique's story, but with no sign of Tony and no evidence of foul play, there's little else they can do.
They had a feeling Monique wasn't telling the whole story, but a feeling isn't grounds for an arrest.
While Monique remains adamant she has no idea what happened to Tony, investigators wonder if Tony's phone records might shed more light on his disappearance.
They pulled Tony's phone records and see he had gotten a text from a woman at 7 a.m. But this woman wasn't Monique Johnson.
Her name was Kim Chapman. So, of course, the next question from police is, who is this woman? What's her connection to Tony Hayes?
That afternoon, detectives ask Kim Chapman to come to the station for an interview. When Kim arrives, she makes quite the impression.
She was very different from Monique. She was a professional woman. She was about 6 feet tall. She had a large frame.
Detectives want to know what her connection is to Tony Hayes. And she says they've been casually dating for the past few months.
The reason we called you in is because we've obtained phone records indicating you had contact with Tony on the date of his disappearance.
Yeah, I texted him because I wanted to go jogging. I was seeing if he was able to come with me.
According to Kim, she got a call back from Tony's phone a short time later. But the voice on the other end of the line wasn't what she expected.
What Kim reveals next will dramatically alter the course of the investigation into Tony Hayes' disappearance and illuminate just how sordid and potentially deadly his love life had become.
I think he was a fun-loving guy, a good guy, but someone who played the field too much. He just played with the wrong one.
48 hours, police in Memphis, Tennessee have been desperately trying to track down their missing colleague, Tony Hayes. The search for Tony has led investigators to a trio of beautiful young women, including Tony's wife, Kayla, his girlfriend, Monique Johnson, and the young woman now seated across from them at the station, Kim Chapman.
Kim Chapman admitted she and Tony were seeing each other and that she had texted him to go jogging the day he went missing. Investigators want to know if she had anything to do with his disappearance.
The last contact that you had with Tony was that text?
Well, I got a call back from someone else. I don't know who she is. Her name was Monique.
Hello?
Kim says she answered the phone expecting it to be Tony, but instead, somebody else was on the line, Monique Johnson.
Monique says, "What are you doing getting together with Tony?" And Kim's going, "Whoa, who are you and why do you care?"
And Monique said, "Well, who are you? I'm Tony's girlfriend. Well, he's been with me all weekend. Did you know about me?"
I don't care. No.
Kim claims the call dropped moments later, but not before she heard another voice in the background.
Tony!
Kim says she heard Tony's voice, and he was angry. And Monique was just giving it right back to him.
Monique Johnson had previously told police she had no reason to harm Tony. But if Kim Chapman's statement is true, detectives have proof that Monique and Tony got in a heated argument just hours before he disappeared.
The detectives don't think this is a coincidence.
That evening, investigators bring Monique in for questioning a third time and confront her about Kim's allegations.
We're going to give you one last chance to be honest with us and tell us what really happened to Tony Hayes.
I don't know.
Ms. Johnson, we talked to Kim Chapman. She told us that the day that Tony disappeared, you and him got into a scuffle.
Monique knows she's in a really bad place. So she says, okay, I'll talk.
Monique says that after she confronted Tony about his marriage to Kayla Hayes, he assured her there were no other women in his life. But over time, Monique began to doubt that he was truly faithful to her.
There were some flags. It would be unexplained absences or a refusal to really acknowledge where he'd been or what he'd been doing, or phone calls that he couldn't take. That's when tempers began to flare on both sides. He became very adamant about it not happening, or angry that she didn't trust him, and she was very angry that he wasn't trustworthy.
Monique claims that the situation came to a head the morning Tony disappeared.
The phone is going off, and she is compelled by the mistrust to look at the phone. And it's a text.
Monique says the text was from one Kim Chapman.
Monique said in her statement that she was tired of being played around with.
She couldn't take it no more. She was just real jealous.
She grabbed the phone and left Tony's house while he was in the shower and jumped in her car and began to call the female.
According to Monique, she was driving to her house while on the phone with Kim, and by the time she pulled into her garage, she was boiling mad.
Who the hell is this? While Monique is having this conversation with Kim, she spots Tony in her rearview mirror. He's caught up to her and wants his phone back.
Give me the damn phone. Give me the damn phone. I'm not playing with you, I'm serious. Give me the damn phone.
According to Monique, that's when Tony lunged at her.
She doesn't think he's coming for the phone. She thinks he's coming for her.
She described it, Tony hit her this time.
Get out the car!
Monique claims Tony's aggressive behavior was so terrifying that she feared for her life. That's when she reached for Tony's .40 caliber handgun, which he'd recently left under the passenger seat of her car.
And that's when it happens. She remembers the first shot, and that's about all she remembers.
I was so scared.
She asserts she acted in self-defense.
But if Monique had truly acted in self-defense, why is this the first time detectives are hearing this story?
From her perspective, because Tony was a police officer, she was afraid to go and confess to the same people that he worked with.
Monique says that in a panic, she turned to the only person she could think of, her son from a previous marriage, 16-year-old Donald Wallace.
Monique enlists the help of her son to remove Tony's body from the home, stuff him in the trunk of his own Lexus.
She made the son an accomplice to that act. I mean, what a horrible thing to do to your 16-year-old.
Detectives push Monique to tell them where Tony's body is. Monique does them one better. She takes them to the East Memphis apartment complex where she and her son Donald abandoned the vehicle.
They placed her in the squad car, and she took them directly to Tony's Lexus. And the body was in the trunk of that vehicle.
They backed it in so no one would notice the license plates.
That body had been sitting there for 4 days in this Memphis heat, and it was highly deformed. It was very hard to look at the body and even tell that it was Tony.
While CSIs process the car, detectives break the tragic news to Tony's family.
The police department came over there and told her that Monique Johnson has confessed to what happened.
Mother Hay was devastated. You know, so many hopes and dreams are lost when your child is gone. And you know he's not going to come back, and it's especially when it's due to violence. It just hurts more.
With Monique's confession, This deputy jailer now finds herself behind bars, though she doesn't expect to be there for long.
She remained adamant that this was purely a case of self-defense and that she was the victim, not Tony.
But soon, an unlikely witness will step forward with new information. Information that threatens to turn the whole case upside down.
It's so inexcusable. It's not just the public doesn't understand, nobody understands.
On Friday, September 8th, 2006, in a Memphis police station, Monique Johnson confessed to shooting her boyfriend, police officer Tony Hayes, in a heated argument inside the garage of her home. A shooting Monique insists she only committed in self-defense.
She claims he lunged at her, struck her, attacked her, and she defended herself.
To find out if there's any truth to Monique's story, investigators bring in the young man who helped Monique move Tony's body, her 16-year-old son, Donald.
Your mother told us that you helped her carry Tony's body.
Donald, because of that, at this point, we're going to be charging you with accessory after the fact, okay? However, if you're willing to cooperate with us, there's a chance that we can get you off or help at least cut you a deal.
Okay.
Donald starts by telling detectives where to find the gun used in the shooting. It's in a garbage dumpster at an East Memphis apartment complex.
It was Tony's personal weapon, a .40 caliber pistol.
But that isn't all Donald tells police. He also makes a chilling revelation about the hours following Tony's death.
There was a time period after the shooting where Monique and her son left. They went to TGI Fridays, and then they went to a movie with some family members and saw snakes on a plane.
She went to dinner and a movie and enjoyed herself while her supposed boyfriend is starting to rot.
Was this the behavior simply of a woman in shock? Or was Monique actively trying to establish an alibi for herself in order to throw police off her trail? What Donald says next gives investigators a possible clue. In fact, he claims he was in the house at the time of the shooting.
Mom? He hears a series of gunshots go off in his own house, and he is instinctively terrified of what has happened to his mother.
Mom, what's going on? Mom, what did you do to him?
He eventually gets into the bedroom and discovers his mother, frantic by that point, and Tony lying on the floor bleeding.
The significance of that statement is that it directly contradicts Monique's version of events. She claims the shooting took place in the garage.
Police execute a search warrant of Monique's home, but at first there seems to be a problem with young Donald's story.
There was no blood up in that bathroom or bedroom, no bullets.
But as investigators take a closer look at the scene, they spot something unusual about the doors leading to the bathroom.
The paint didn't actually match up with the same paint that Monique had on her house. So you could tell that there had been one of the doors replaced in her home.
Detectives confront Monique about the new doors in her house, as well as the discrepancy between Donald's statement and her own version of what happened. Once again, Monique changes her story. She now claims that her fight began in the garage, but ended inside the house.
That whirlwind proceeds into the house. Tony's following her.
Monique says she fled to the safety of her master bedroom, but Tony forced his way inside.
He slams the door, locks it, and she feels a fist hit her in the back of the head.
Monique claims that before she knew what was happening, Tony was physically assaulting her. Thankfully, she managed to escape into the bathroom, but Tony didn't stop coming for her.
She's really getting scared, and she's telling him, Tony, just leave me alone, Tony, go. And he's coming into the bathroom towards her. Finally, she finds her way back to her master closet, just behind the bathroom, and that's where her gun is.
She felt like she had nowhere to hide, nowhere to go, and nothing to do other than to defend herself.
After the first shot, she describes herself as going into a state of shock. She's unable to really accurately describe the physicality of what happened, the number of bullets that come out of the gun.
In the aftermath that followed, Monique says she noticed a bullet hole in one of the bathroom doors.
Monique went to one of the empty homes or model homes in the neighborhood, and took one of the doors out of another model home and brought it and put it back on her bathroom door.
All the while, Monique's son was helping her do this.
Just grab his feet and help me.
But Monique insists that she only concocted her first story to try to minimize her son's role in the shooting.
She doesn't want Donald involved. She doesn't want him to go to jail. She wanted him out of it.
She was a mother trying to protect her son.
For Memphis authorities, Monique's shifting story casts serious doubt on her claims of self-defense.
Her story keeps changing. First, the argument and the shooting take place in the garage. Then, it had happened upstairs in her bedroom.
Later that day, the coroner's office releases Tony's autopsy report, and it casts even more doubt over Monique's statement.
He was shot 6 times. 4 bullets entered through his back, 1 through his chest, and 1 through his head at a downward angle. This woman, who's 5'6", was supposedly cowering from a 6'1" man.
4 shots in the back, 1 in the head, a downward projectile. So what does that look like? It looks like she's standing over him, executing him, and 1 in the chest.
There was no doubt in the state's mind that this was a premeditated murder.
Since the statement from Monique's son Donald helped investigators get closer to the truth, they grant him some leeway on the accessory charges.
Donald was placed on judicial diversion for his role, and he was really given a great opportunity to move forward with his life.
But prosecutors plan to pursue Monique with the full force of the law. On February 9th, 2007, Monique Johnson is indicted on first-degree murder charges.
If she was convicted, she could spend the rest of her life in prison.
But was this truly the slam dunk case that prosecutors believed? Or was Monique Johnson and her defense team saving the best version of her ever-changing story for last?
Everyone, again, they rushed to judgment. And all we could say was, you just wait until you hear the full story before you make your judgment on Monique Johnson.
In Memphis, Monique Johnson insists she acted in self-defense when she shot and killed her boyfriend, police officer Tony Hayes. But prosecutors believe Monique murdered Tony in cold blood.
The crux of this case essentially revolves around whether or not Monique Johnson was the victim, the perpetrator, or both of intimate partner violence.
Before the case even makes it to trial, sparring begins between the prosecution and defense. At a pretrial hearing, Monique's legal team tries to keep crime scene photos out of court.
The pictures that were taken of the car and the trunk when they opened it and found Tony Hayes there were particularly graphic, and it was the state's contention that it was essential that the jury see these pictures, because this is in fact what she did to him. This is what Monique did to Tony.
But according to the defense, these photos had nothing to do with how Tony was murdered and were just the byproduct of decomposition in the sweltering Memphis heat.
We were able to keep some of those pictures out because they were pretty nasty and pretty ugly.
The judge did not let any pictures of his body to go to the jury. I knew that was going to hurt us with the jury because pictures speak 1,000 words and jurors want to see them.
On February 12, 2008, Monique Johnson's murder trial gets underway inside a packed Shelby County courtroom.
It's a case that's captured the public's fascination, probably because it does involve an attractive couple, one of whom's a police officer and the other's a correctional officer. You'd expect them to behave better.
In their opening statements, prosecutors portray Monique as a scorned, jealous lover who was out for revenge against her two-timing boyfriend.
Tony did have a reputation for playing around with women, and I don't think she wanted to be played with. She was angry.
So angry, in fact, that when Monique discovered Kim Chapman's text message on September 4th, 2006, the beautiful femme fatale concocted a plan to exact the ultimate revenge against her unfaithful boyfriend.
The state feels like Monique's state of mind was. She was, in essence, creating a trap. Monique wanted to trap him back in her bedroom
Tony was shot 6 times, including a round that was fired in a downward trajectory. As far as the state was concerned, that seriously undermined Monique's story of self-defense.
Then there's Monique's evasive actions in the aftermath of the shooting. She lied to police, she hid his body and the weapon used to kill him, and cleaned up the scene.
But Monique's defense team asserts their client did have a legitimate reason to be scared of Tony Hayes that morning.
The defense team essentially stated that she was a battered woman and was acting in self-defense.
She said maybe 3 months into the relationship was the first episode of abuse. A few months later, there's this next episode. And eventually it was more frequent.
To bolster their claims of abuse, the defense calls several members of Monique's family to the witness stand.
They testified that they had seen marks on her neck and on her thighs.
But for prosecutors, as well as Tony's friends and family, the abuse allegations don't hold much water.
The reason Monique said that she pulled the trigger, that my uncle was abusive, but no police report on domestic violence or nothing like that ever happened.
I knew Tony for 32 years. I never knew him to ever hit a lady. I think Monique was just trying to come up with a defense.
In fact, prosecutors say if anyone in the relationship had a history of violence, it was Monique. As proof, they point to a report Tony filed against her in May of 2006.
In a fit of jealous rage, Monique cut Tony's clothes, carved obscenities into his headboard and into the side of his car, cut the electrical cords on his appliances, and poured baby oil into his shoes.
Tony did call police, though he didn't go forward with charges.
So it was clear in the state's mind that he was the victim. He was the one who was being psychologically abused.
So was Monique Johnson a violent and vindictive lover like prosecutors claim? Or is she, as the defense suggests, a victim of abuse? On Valentine's Day 2008, jurors got to hear Monique's side of the story firsthand.
I was very concerned that Monique probably should not take the stand. But in trying to establish self-defense, the jury would need to hear from Monique. They would need to understand her mental state.
She would start crying when presented with certain things, like her prior vandalism. She would go, well, you know, he just did so much to make me so angry, and I felt like I could never be free of him. And it was all her being oppressed.
I would ask her, did you love Tony? And she would start bawling and say, yeah, I loved him. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want him to die. It became pretty clear that she wasn't just this cold, calculating killer, but was truly someone who was in love with Tony and didn't know how to get away from it.
But who would the jury find more credible? Monique and her emotional testimony, or the state and its physical and circumstantial evidence? On February 15th, they hand down their verdict.
She wasn't found guilty of first-degree murder, but a lesser charge of reckless homicide, which carries a 2 to 4 year sentence.
For prosecutors and Tony's family, it's a crushing defeat.
It was just like someone had knocked all the air out of me. Really? Did we hear this right? This can't be true.
The real victim of domestic violence in this situation was Tony Hayes. He lost his life. He was shot 6 times, and she got away with murder.
For Monique Johnson, the verdict is better than anything she could have imagined.
That was a huge win for us. Huge. Probably one of the best verdicts I've received in my lifetime as a trial attorney.
Ultimately, Monique was sentenced to 4 years in prison. After taking into account the 2 years she had already served, she only has to serve another 2.
And though Monique Johnson is now a free woman, her verdict is still a deeply divisive subject in Memphis. In a story rife with infidelity and mistrust, at least both sides can still agree on one thing.
There are no winners here. This was just ugly. These two never should have been together.
What happens when the ultimate monster hiding in a quiet Pacific Northwest town isn't a roving transient, an escaped convict, or a shadowy figure lurking in the roadside woods, but a revered, soft-spoken pillar of the community who spent decades shaking hands with local police officers, hosting neighborhood fundraisers and sitting at the family dinner table. On a freezing, fog-drenched Tuesday evening in November 1991, in the quiet, timber-backed town of Crestview, Oregon, 21-year-old college student and community center volunteer Rachel Vance finished wiping down the craft tables, locked the front doors of the municipal center, and stepped out into the autumn mist. She was walking just 3 blocks down Oak Street to meet her fiancé at a local diner. She had walked that exact route hundreds of times, under the yellow halo of street lamps and past the familiar storefronts of her childhood home. She never reached the diner. Her leather handbag was found 2 hours later lying open on the wet asphalt near the edge of an alley behind the historic town hall, its contents untouched, her silver wristwatch ticking on the pavement, and a single drop of fresh blood glistening on the cold brick wall. The sudden, silent disappearance of Rachel Vance detonated an immediate, paralyzing shockwave through the timber community of 6,000 residents. Headlines screamed across regional newspapers in bold, black type. Nightmare in Crestview. College student vanishes in the fog. The town locked its doors, pulled its blinds, and watched every passing headlights with sharp, paranoid suspicion. In 1991, Crestview was an insular, trusting mountain town where families left their porch lights on, where neighbors gathered at high school football games every Friday night, and where violent crime was something that only happened on the evening news in big cities. Yet right in the heart of this peaceful sanctuary, a ruthless predator had stepped out of the heavy mist, plucked an innocent young woman off a well-lit sidewalk, and vanished into the night without leaving behind a single tire mark, a footprint in the mud, or a frantic scream for help. When the Crestview Police Department and Oregon State Police troopers established their joint command post at the county sheriff's office, they were confronted with a crime scene that offered virtually zero tangible clues. The heavy coastal fog that rolled off the Pacific and settled over the valley that night had saturated the ground, washing away delicate footwear impressions, tire tread details, and latent biological trace evidence. 48 hours after her disappearance, a team of volunteer searchers sweeping the dense Douglas fir forest near the abandoned Blackwood sawmill, 5 miles outside of town, spotted a flash of bright red fabric snagged on a wild blackberry bramble. It was Rachel's winter coat. 50 yards deeper into the overgrown ravine, hidden beneath a blanket of damp pine needles and rotting cedar logs, searchers uncovered her lifeless body. She had been bound with heavy industrial nylon cord, struck on the back of the head with a blunt object, and strangled. Her silver engagement ring was missing, her pocket calendar was torn to shreds, and her personal effects were scattered across the forest floor. The homicide investigation launched with frantic, high-intensity momentum. Detectives fanned out across the county, pounding on doors, questioning late-night gas station attendants, interviewing timber truck drivers, and scrutinizing every known offender within a 100-mile radius. Dozens of frantic tips flooded the police hotline, pointing fingers at passing drifters, transient sawmill laborers, and long-haul truckers navigating State Route 26. But every single promising lead quickly collapsed into a dead end. The town hall's exterior security lighting had suffered a power failure earlier that evening. No witnesses reported seeing a suspicious vehicle idling near the alley, and polygraph examinations administered to local suspects yielded inconclusive results that provided state prosecutors with zero legal leverage. Rachel Vance's murder was rapidly turning into an investigative nightmare, a brutal, high-profile crime in a terrified town without an eyewitness, a murder weapon, or a primary suspect. As the weeks bled into agonizing months, the furious pace of the investigation began to stall. The daily media coverage shifted from front-page headlines to small, buried updates on page 10 before evaporating from the newspapers entirely. The file on Rachel Vance grew thick with yellowed witness statements, field interview cards, and inconclusive crime lab reports, eventually being stamped with the cold, damning words that haunt every victim's family. Unsolved, cold case. The winter frost gave way to spring rains, the timber mills resumed their daily shifts, and the world outside moved on. Children returned to the local parks. The college held its commencement ceremony with an empty chair reserved on the lawn, and the alley behind Town Hall was repaved. But inside the Vance home, time remained permanently frozen in November 1991. Rachel's bedroom was kept untouched, her textbooks still sitting on her desk, her winter clothes still hanging in the closet, a silent, sacred shrine to a young woman whose killer was still breathing the fresh mountain air. Decades rolled past with relentless, uncompromising speed. The 1990s faded into the 2000s, the turn of the millennium arrived, and technology leaped forward into a digital era that seemed light years away from the paper index cards and Polaroid photographs of 1991. The original detectives who had processed the Sawmill crime scene retired, grew old, and passed away without ever solving the case. Rachel's parents died of broken hearts years apart, holding her childhood photograph, leaving her surviving younger sister as the sole torchbearer of her memory. The case file sat on a dusty metal shelf in the Oregon State Police cold case vault, a dormant ghost gathering dust alongside hundreds of other forgotten tragedies, seemingly destined to remain one of the Pacific Northwest's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. Then came the spring of 2026. 35 years after Rachel Vance was left beneath the pine needles of the Blackwood Sawmill Ravine, a quiet, revolutionary breakthrough inside a specialized genetic laboratory in Texas shattered over 3 decades of silence and set off an explosive chain reaction that would send shockwaves across the nation. Cold case investigators, utilizing funds from a federal grant, re-examined the original physical evidence stored in the state police vault. Back in 1991, crime scene technicians had carefully preserved the heavy nylon cord used to bind Rachel's wrists, sealing it inside a climate-controlled paper evidence bag. Using cutting-edge touch DNA extraction techniques that were pure science fiction in 1991, forensic geneticists meticulously swabbed the inner fibers of the nylon knots, isolating microscopic skin cells left behind by the killer's hands as he tied the cord. The laboratory successfully extracted a full, pristine male DNA profile. But when the profile was run through the FBI's national database, CODIS, no match was returned. The killer had no criminal record on file. He had never been arrested, never been fingerprinted, and had lived his life entirely off the law enforcement radar. The investigation seemed dead in the water once again. But cold case detectives immediately pivoted to a game-changing tool that was transforming American justice: investigative genetic genealogy. The unknown killer's DNA profile was uploaded to public genealogy databases like GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. Genetic genealogists worked around the clock, constructing a massive, intricate family tree built from distant second and third cousins who had submitted their DNA for ancestry searches. The digital branches spanned across 4 generations, narrowing down the ancestral lineage to a single family unit that had lived in Western Oregon during the early 1990s. Within 3 weeks of exhaustive genealogical mapping, the massive web of thousands of relatives converged onto a single, terrifying target. The genetic data pointed directly to a man who was 68 years old, lived in a sprawling suburban home just 20 miles from Crestview, and had spent 34 years working as a highly respected civil engineer, church elder, and former city planning commissioner, Arthur "Artie" Pendleton. The news hit the cold case task force like a physical blow. Arthur Pendleton was not a transient or a drifter. In 1991, he was 33 years old, a prominent engineer for the County Public Works Department, and the very official who had overseen the infrastructure maintenance for Crestview's municipal buildings on the exact night Rachel vanished. In fact, historical newspaper archives from November 1991 revealed a photograph that made the lead investigator's blood run cold: a young Arthur Pendleton standing beside the town mayor, addressing a crowded town hall meeting, reassuring frightened citizens that the city was upgrading its streetlights, and offering a personal cash reward for information leading to Rachel's killer, while her body lay unrecovered in the forest. Under intense cover, state police undercover operatives launched a covert surveillance operation on the retired engineer. For 5 days, detectives trailed Pendleton as he ran errands, attended community meetings, and worked on classic cars in his garage. On a sunny Wednesday afternoon outside a hardware store, undercover officers watched Pendleton finish a bottle of iced tea, wipe his mouth with a paper napkin, and discard the plastic bottle and napkin into a public trash receptacle. The moment Pendleton drove away, Detectives secured the trash bag, preserving the disposable bottle for emergency laboratory testing. 24 hours later, the State Police Crime Lab in Portland issued its final emergency report. The touch DNA extracted from the disposable bottle matched the male DNA profile recovered from the nylon cord bound around Rachel Vance's wrists in 1991 with a mathematical certainty of 1 in 8 billion. The 35-year illusion of a respected, pillar of the community civil servant collapsed in an instant. On a quiet Thursday morning, 35 years after Rachel Vance vanished in the November fog, a fleet of unmarked state police cruisers pulled into the circular driveway of Arthur Pendleton's suburban home. SWAT teams secured the perimeter while veteran homicide detectives walked up the front path. When Pendleton opened his front door, holding a coffee mug, officers pushed past him, presenting the arrest warrant for first-degree aggravated murder. The mild-mannered, silver-haired engineer showed no explosive rage, no terror, and no tears. He simply set his mug down on the entry table, looked at the lead detective with a cold, hollow stare, and whispered 5 chilling words that sent a freeze down the spine of every officer present. "You took long enough to find me." Part 2. The 5 chilling words whispered by 68-year-old Arthur Pendleton on his sunlit front entryway did not merely signal the end of a 35-year game of cat and mouse. They detonated a psychological and institutional megaton blast across the entire Pacific Northwest. As the silver-haired, retired civil engineer and former city planning commissioner was led down his manicured driveway in heavy steel handcuffs, flanked by state troopers and federal agents, the tranquil facade of his suburban neighborhood dissolved into utter chaos. News cameras from local television stations rushed to the scene, capturing the surreal, terrifying images of a man who had spent 3 decades shaping municipal infrastructure and attending local council meetings being loaded into the back of an unmarked law enforcement vehicle. Headlines exploded across digital feeds, television screens, and front pages nationwide in bold, sensationalized type. Oregon 1991 cold case finally solved, secret double life revealed. The shockwave hit the timber town of Crestview with brutal, suffocating force. For over 3 decades, the citizens of the valley had lived under the haunting assumption that the monster who took Rachel Vance in November 1991 was an anonymous, roving predator, a transient trucker passing through on State Route 26, or an escaped convict hiding in the rugged Douglas fir timberlands. The horrifying realization that the killer was not a stranger, but the soft-spoken, authoritative county engineer who had inspected the town hall streetlights, signed public works contracts, sat in church pews every Sunday morning, and offered a cash reward for Rachel's recovery paralyzed the community with grief, fury, and existential betrayal. Former colleagues, municipal workers, and lifelong friends flooded social media and local news tip lines with expressions of absolute disbelief, struggling to reconcile the gentle, detail-oriented professional who had organized charity drives with the cold-blooded killer who had bound, struck, and choked a 21-year-old college student in the mud of the Blackwood Sawmill Ravine. Inside the interrogation room at the Oregon State Police headquarters in Portland, the atmosphere was thick with intense, simmering tension. Sitting beneath the stark, unyielding glare of fluorescent lights, flanked by 2 high-priced criminal defense attorneys specializing in capital defense, Arthur Pendleton transformed from the warm, grandfatherly civil servant into a terrifyingly distant, detached sociopath. Despite his chilling initial remark to the arresting officers on his front porch, Pendleton immediately clammed up once seated at the steel table. On the advice of his legal counsel, he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to answer direct questions about the night of November 12, 1991. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, his expression completely blank, staring at the color crime scene photographs of Rachel Vance's red coat and missing engagement ring with an eerie, total lack of emotion. His legal defense team launched an immediate, aggressive public relations and procedural counteroffensive. They filed emergency motions to suppress the disposable bottle DNA evidence, arguing that the covert collection of abandoned trash constituted an illegal search and seizure under state constitutional law. They publicly questioned the reliability of investigative genetic genealogy, attempting to frame the technology as a dystopian, unregulated privacy violation that compromised the civil liberties of millions of unsuspecting citizens whose family members had uploaded DNA for ancestry research. They were convinced that by attacking the chain of custody and leveraging Pendleton's pristine, spotless reputation as an award-winning civil engineer, they could create enough reasonable doubt to stall the indictment or force the state into a compromised plea bargain. However, state prosecutors and the cold case task force, led by a relentless veteran district attorney who had promised Rachel's late parents that justice would be served, were prepared for a legal war of attrition. They knew that while the touch DNA match on the nylon cord was scientifically ironclad, boasting a statistical probability of 1 in 8 billion, securing a bulletproof conviction in front of a jury required building an absolute, impenetrable web of physical, digital, and circumstantial proof. They needed to know everything about Arthur Pendleton's life in 1991. They needed to trace his every move, unearth his hidden journal entries, audit his historical communications, and discover whether Rachel Vance was his sole tragic victim or merely the first entry in a dark, hidden lifetime of predatory violence. Equipped with comprehensive federal search warrants, state police forensic teams, accompanied by FBI behavioral analysts and evidence response units, descended upon Pendleton's suburban home, his retired engineering office space, and an isolated mountain hunting cabin he owned in the Cascade foothills near Mount Hood. For 5 days, forensic specialists meticulously searched every square inch of the properties, utilizing ground-penetrating radar arrays, thermal imaging devices, and specialized digital extraction software to probe for hidden compartments, secret digital files, and archived physical trophies. What the evidence response team uncovered inside the subterranean cellar beneath Pendleton's mountain cabin turned a single-solved cold case into an active, multi-jurisdictional serial predator investigation. Tucked behind a false stone wall built into the foundation, hidden inside a heavy steel junction box, investigators discovered a dark, meticulously organized archive of human misery. Inside the box were dozens of wire-bound ledgers written in Pendleton's precise, technical handwriting, spanning from 1982 to 2015. But resting alongside the ledgers was a collection of items that made the lead investigators' blood run cold. A velvet-lined wooden tray containing 7 vintage engagement rings and class rings from various towns in Oregon and Washington, several silver charm bracelets, and a stack of yellowed, original newspaper clippings detailing unsolved missing persons cases across the Pacific Northwest spanning 35 years. Among the items in the wooden tray was a silver ring engraved with a solitaire diamond setting and the initials RV, Rachel Vance's missing engagement ring, stolen from her finger 35 years earlier and kept as a personal trophy by the very engineer who had addressed the town hall meeting after her disappearance. The discovery of the trophy box in the cabin cellar shattered Pendleton's legal defense strategy into dust. The physical link between the killer and the victim was no longer just microscopic skin cells left on a cord. It was the direct, physical possession of the victim's personal stolen property, hidden in a secret compartment on his private mountain land for nearly 4 decades. When state geneticists processed the remaining class rings and jewelry recovered from the wooden tray, the digital database returned hits that connected Pendleton to 4 additional unsolved missing persons and homicide cases across Oregon and Washington state between 1984 and 1999. The realization that a prominent, decorated municipal civil engineer had utilized his professional standing, his clean record, his access to municipal utility trucks, and his position of authority over city infrastructure to operate as an unchecked, methodical predator across 2 states for over 30 years sent shockwaves through the highest levels of regional law enforcement and state government. County public works departments across the Pacific Northwest launched immediate historical audits of Pendleton's engineering career, attempting to identify every public works project, municipal drainage vault, and isolated utility installation he had supervised during his decades in public service. The picture that emerged was an indictment of an era when professional civil servants were granted unquestioned trust, where subtle red flags were brushed aside as professional quirks, and where a charismatic municipal official could hide his dark nature behind a wall of public works blueprints and community service awards. Inside the Portland detention facility, Faced with the unearthing of his secret trophy box, the scientific impossibility of contesting the DNA match, and the looming threat of capital charges in multiple jurisdictions, Arthur Pendleton's cold, arrogant resolve finally collapsed. Realizing that his carefully constructed lifetime illusion was irrevocably destroyed and that he would spend the rest of his natural life behind iron bars, Pendleton agreed to a formal, recorded deposition with state prosecutors and federal profilers. On a bleak, rain-swept afternoon in late August 2026, sitting in a wheelchair due to a sudden decline in his physical health, 68-year-old Arthur Pendleton entered a packed courtroom at the Multnomah County Courthouse. Surrounded by the surviving younger sister of Rachel Vance, grieving relatives of his other hidden victims, and former municipal colleagues who watched in silent horror, Pendleton entered a formal plea of guilty to first-degree murder, kidnapping, and official misconduct. Sitting in the witness stand, his raspy, quiet voice barely audible through the courtroom microphones, the former civil engineer was forced to read a detailed, line-by-line confession describing how he had used his access to city streetlight maintenance schedules to black out the alley behind Town Hall, how he had waited for Rachel in the fog, how he had bound her wrists and carried her in his city-issued utility truck to the Blackwood Sawmill Ravine, and how he had spent 35 years living a double life as a respected civil servant while keeping her engagement ring in his mountain cabin. The presiding judge showed zero mercy, sentencing Arthur Pendleton to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ordering him to be transported immediately to the maximum security Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. As the heavy steel handcuffs clicked around his wrists and guards led the disgraced engineer away into the dark corridors of the judicial system, a quiet, overwhelming wave of emotion swept through the courtroom gallery. For the surviving sister of Rachel Vance, for the traumatized community of Crestview, and for the cold case detectives who had refused to let her file gather dust, the 35-year nightmare had finally reached its ultimate, undeniable conclusion. The killer who had hidden behind the blue-collared municipal badge, signed public works contracts, and addressed the town hall meeting had been dragged out of the shadows, exposed by the unyielding power of modern genetic science, and brought to his final, permanent judgment in the light of truth. The heavy thud of the courtroom doors echoing behind Arthur Pendleton brought no immediate sense of quiet or release to the Pacific Northwest. If the public believed that a 5-time life sentence handed down to a 68-year-old retired civil engineer would allow Oregon to close the book on a tragic chapter, they were profoundly mistaken. The formal unmasking of Pendleton as the killer of Rachel Vance was not the final scene of a self-contained tragedy. It was the opening explosion in a massive, systemic unraveling that threatened to tear down the historic reputation of the state's municipal infrastructure departments and expose a 3-decade web of institutional blindness. When state police evidence response teams and FBI behavioral analysts completed their audit of the heavy steel junction box recovered from the subterranean cellar of Pendleton's Cascade cabin, the physical inventory went far beyond the wooden tray containing Rachel's engagement ring and the jewelry of 4 other confirmed victims. Deep within the lower compartment of the chest lay a series of bound ledger books, municipal work order logs, and microcassette audio tapes dating back to 1982. The materials were not mere personal diaries. They were a chilling, technical chronicle of predatory logistics. Pendleton had used his dual authority as a senior public works engineer and a city planning advisor to systematically profile, track, and ambush young women across multiple county jurisdictions in western Oregon and southern Washington. The revelation sent shockwaves through state law enforcement and legislative committees. The realization that a decorated civil servant had utilized city-issued utility trucks, municipal access codes, late-night maintenance schedules, and isolated public works depots as cover for a predatory career spanning over 30 years sparked immediate, incandescent fury among the public. Former municipal employees who had worked alongside Pendleton in the late 1980s and 1990s were suddenly forced to look back on their careers through a horrifying new lens. Subtle details that had been brushed off for decades as the harmless quirks of an overly precise, eccentric engineer, unrecorded late-night inspections of rural utility sites, personal detours taken in city maintenance vehicles, and an intense fixation on dark, unlit alleys, were exposed for what they truly were: the calculated reconnaissance behavior of an active serial predator operating under the color of official authority. In September 2026, the governor of Oregon issued an executive order establishing the Special Commission on Municipal Integrity and Historical Crimes, appointing an independent task force composed of retired federal prosecutors, forensic engineers, digital archivist specialists, and cold case homicide detectives. Codenamed Operation Vaulted Shadow, the task force was granted unrestricted subpoena power to audit the employment records, administrative vehicle logs, internal grievance memos, and public works dispatch reports of every municipal department where Arthur Pendleton had been employed between 1982 and his retirement in 2018. The mandate was uncompromising: determine how many times administrative red flags had been ignored, how many times citizen complaints had been swept under the rug, and whether institutional negligence had actively enabled a murderer to hold county keys for 35 years. The first major administrative breakthrough came within 3 weeks of opening the archived personnel lockers at the former Crestview Public Works Administrative Building. Tucked inside a sealed manila envelope marked Confidential, Internal Service Review 1993, task force investigators unearthed a series of handwritten notes and formal incident reports that had never been turned over to state police during the original 1991 murder investigation. In the spring of 1993, 18 months after Rachel Vance was found bound and murdered in the Blackwood Sawmill Ravine, a female clerk at the Crestview Municipal Office had reported to her supervisor that Mr. Pendleton had followed her home in a city utility truck late at night and had been spotted parked near her driveway with his headlights turned off. The administrative response preserved in those yellowed files was a damning indictment of institutional self-protection. Rather than contacting the county sheriff or the state police cold case team that was still actively searching for Rachel's killer, the public works director held a private, internal meeting with Pendleton. The director wrote a soft reprimand, describing the incident as an overzealous application of off-hours route monitoring, advised Pendleton to limit his late-night vehicle use, and placed the incident report in a locked private file off the public record. Pendleton was allowed to keep his engineering position, his municipal keys, his utility truck access, and his unrestricted movement across the county, completely shielded from law enforcement scrutiny. The publication of these unsealed internal records ignited an explosive wave of public outrage across Oregon. Citizens realized that Rachel Vance's murder was not merely the result of an unlucky encounter with a hidden monster in the fog. It was a crime that took place within a broken, protective culture that prioritized the institutional reputation of a municipal department over the physical safety of the community. Demonstrations erupted outside county courthouses and public works facilities, with local residents and grieving families demanding the immediate resignation and criminal prosecution of retired supervisors who had signed off on the 1993 cover-up. While the administrative audit laid bare the institutional failures of the past, state police forensic teams were racing against the clock to match the microcassette tapes and ledger entries recovered from Pendleton's cellar with unsolved missing persons cases across the Pacific Northwest. On 4 separate cassette tapes recorded between 1988 and 1997, Pendleton had surreptitiously recorded private conversations with young women, capturing their voices, their confusion, and their frantic pleas for help during their final moments. The audio files were processed by digital forensic audio engineers using state-of-the-art acoustic enhancement software to filter out background noise and engine hum. On a tape marked November 1995, analysts isolated the distinct voice of 22-year-old library assistant Megan Larson, who had vanished from a bus stop near Salem, Oregon, while traveling home from a late shift. On the recording, Pendleton could be heard speaking in the same calm, measured, technical tone he used in city planning presentations, explaining to the terrified young woman that her disappearance was simply a structural necessity of his private design. The sheer, sociopathic detachment in his voice sent a chilling shock through the forensic lab, proving that Pendleton viewed his horrific acts not as crimes, but as dark, methodical engineering projects designed to satisfy his monstrous ego. Using spatial mapping data extracted from Pendleton's 1995 personal ledgers, which contained coded survey coordinates disguised as municipal drainage project numbers, state police tactical units, and cadaver K, 9 teams descended upon an isolated stretch of public utility land near the Santiam River in the Cascade foothills. For 3 days, search teams swept through the dense hemlock forest under heavy autumn rains. On the 4th morning, ground-penetrating radar registered a deep subsurface anomaly beneath a collapsed concrete utility vault. Excavation revealed the preserved remains of Megan Larson, buried 6 feet deep in heavy mountain soil and wrapped in heavy rubberized municipal tarpaulin bound with nylon cord, the exact same binding pattern used on Rachel Vance 4 years earlier. The recovery of Megan Larson's remains raised the confirmed death toll tied to Arthur Pendleton to 6 victims across 2 states. Criminologists and federal profilers reviewing the master timeline realized that Pendleton was one of the most methodical, disciplined serial predators in modern American history, a man who had successfully balanced a high-profile, public-facing career as an award-winning civil engineer with a dark, parallel life as a relentless killer, using his clean record and municipal authority as the ultimate camouflage. Back in his concrete cell at the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem, 68-year-old Arthur Pendleton sat in total, cold isolation. Stripped of his engineering licenses, his pension, his freedom, and the respect of his community, he refused all requests for voluntary interviews from FBI behavioral analysts and true crime journalists. He spent his days staring at the blank concrete wall of his cell, maintaining a cold, arrogant silence, taking a twisted satisfaction in forcing state investigators to dig through decades of mud and archived paper to uncover his remaining secrets one by one. However, the state prosecutors had no intention of allowing Pendleton to control the final narrative. Armed with the physical evidence recovered from the Santiam River site, the audio cassette tapes, and the unsealed personnel records exposing the 1993 administrative cover-up, the Oregon Department of Justice announced a secondary wave of criminal indictments. Retired municipal supervisors who had knowingly concealed evidence of Pendleton's misconduct were formally charged with gross negligence, official misconduct, and obstruction of justice, a historical legal precedent that signaled to public institutions across the nation that turning a blind eye to predatory behavior would carry an inescapable legal price, no matter how many years had passed. In Crestview, the town began the painful, necessary process of permanent, structural transformation. The alley behind the historic town hall where Rachel Vance had taken her last steps before vanishing into the fog was completely renovated, stripped of its old brickwork, and dedicated as the Rachel Vance Memorial Sanctuary. The park was established not as a place of dark mourning, but as a living sanctuary for young adults, equipped with a state-of-the-art lighting infrastructure, public safety resources, and a permanent scholarship endowment funded by state compensation settlements and private donations. At the entrance to the sanctuary, mounted on a polished slab of native Oregon granite, a bronze plaque was unveiled bearing Rachel's college portrait alongside an inscription that served as a perpetual promise to future generations. Her voice was silenced in the fog, but her truth shattered the shadows. Dedicated to the eternal pursuit of justice, institutional transparency, and the protection of our community. As the autumn of 2026 turned into winter, the heavy coastal fogs returned to the Pacific Northwest, rolling off the ocean and wrapping around the timber slopes of Crestview. But the suffocating cloud of unanswered questions, hidden shame, and institutional fear that had hung over the valley since November 1991 was gone forever. The civil servant who had addressed the town hall meeting had been unmasked as the monster in the woods, the buried files had been dragged into the light, and the girl whose handbag was left on the pavement 35 years earlier had finally been given her complete, unyielding, and eternal justice. The criminal indictment of retired municipal supervisors sent shockwaves through local government circles, but inside the high-tech command center of Operation Vaulted Shadow, investigators recognized that corporate and administrative accountability was merely one front in a much larger, darker campaign. The recovery of Megan Larson's remains near the Santiam River proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Arthur Pendleton's private journals were far more than nostalgic records of past municipal projects. The alphanumeric codes and survey coordinates disguised as public works drainage numbers contained a vast, encrypted ledger that digital analysts were still desperately working to break. With Pendleton sitting mute in his maximum security cell at Salem, taking sadistic pleasure in forcing detectives to search in the dark. The task force was forced to treat his technical journals as a master blueprint of a serial predator's 30-year career. In late October 2026, a specialized team of cryptanalysts from the FBI's Operational Technology Division achieved a monumental technical breakthrough. They discovered that Pendleton had used a modified alphanumeric transposition key based on the 1982 Oregon Department of Transportation Survey Manual, a technical handbook he had helped update during his second year as a county civil engineer. By running the survey codes found in his 1984 to 2005 ledgers through the manual's structural grid system, the software decrypted over 40 specific geographic locations spanning from the Puget Sound region in Washington down to the timber reserves of Northern California. Each coordinate set was paired with a date, an elevation reading, and a single-letter initial. The revelation sent a chilling shockwave through state police headquarters across 3 states. The digital map projected onto the command center screens revealed a horrifying reality. Arthur Pendleton had systematically transformed his public civil engineering career into a geographic hunting ground. Every regional infrastructure conference, every municipal road expansion project, every bridge safety inspection, and every long holiday weekend between 1982 and 2005 was utilized as cover for calculated predatory excursions. Driving his heavy-duty city utility truck, equipped with flashing amber lights, official municipal decals, and high-powered searchlights, Pendleton could park along isolated highway shoulders, municipal water reserves, and restricted public utility easements without drawing a second glance from passing state troopers or local residents. Equipped with specialized ground-penetrating radar arrays, drone-based LiDAR terrain mappers, and certified cadaver search K-9 units, multi-agency task forces launched simultaneous exhumation operations across 4 state forest reserves. The tranquil mountain valleys and coastal timberlands that had drawn campers and hikers for decades were suddenly overrun with state police mobile units, crime scene trailers, and heavy earth-moving equipment. The public watched in paralyzed shock as search crews systematically cleared abandoned logging roads, dismantled decommissioned water storage vaults, and excavated decades-old concrete footings in search of the missing daughters of the Pacific Northwest. The first major recovery under the decrypted survey key occurred in a remote, heavily forested sector of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in southern Washington. On a freezing November morning, search teams using subsurface radar detected a localized soil density anomaly beneath a collapsed timber bridge along a former municipal access road. Excavation revealed the remains of 20-year-old university student Laura Higgins, who had vanished from a transit center in Tacoma, Washington, during her autumn break in October 1987. Beside her remains, forensic technicians recovered a silver charm bracelet matching a description provided by her family 39 years earlier, a personal trinket that Pendleton had logged under initial L in his encrypted survey journal. Within 3 weeks of the Washington recovery, a secondary sweep along the coastal mountain ranges of Tillamook County, Oregon, yielded another horrifying discovery. Inside a subterranean concrete drainage chamber built during a 1994 highway expansion project that Pendleton had personally supervised, search teams uncovered the remains of 2 individuals wrapped together in heavy industrial rubberized tarpaulins sealed with municipal-grade duct tape. Subsequent DNA profiling confirmed the identities as 19-year-old Sarah Jenkins and 20-year-old Emily Croft, college friends who had disappeared while on a weekend camping trip along the Oregon coast in May 1994. The binding patterns, the blunt force cranial trauma, and the removal of personal jewelry bore the exact, undeniable forensic signature of Arthur Pendleton. The recovery of these victims brought the confirmed death toll tied to Pendleton to 9, cementing his status as one of the most methodical, disciplined, and destructive serial predators in modern American history. The sheer, systematic scale of his crimes shattered the long-held myth that serial killers are inherently chaotic, uneducated outcasts incapable of maintaining long-term societal bonds. Pendleton had operated as a respected civil servant, an active church elder, and a trusted municipal advisor for over 30 years, hiding his dark reality behind a wall of public works blueprints, engineering awards, and community service commendations. The national media frenzy surrounding the multi-state exhumations reached an incandescent fever pitch. Television news helicopters hovered over the dense forest search sites, broadcasting live feeds of white forensic tents, yellow crime scene tape, and line after line of searchers clearing mountain brush in the pouring rain. The public mood turned from initial shock to absolute, explosive fury as citizens realized that for 3 decades, a man who sat at city council meetings and managed public infrastructure budgets was actively filling the soil of the Pacific Northwest with the bodies of young women. Inside the Oregon State Penitentiary, the psychological dynamics surrounding Pendleton began to disintegrate. As news of the Washington and coastal recoveries flooded the prison television monitors, Pendleton's cold, arrogant posture began to crumble under the sheer weight of his unraveling legacy. The illusion of the criminal mastermind who would carry his secrets to the grave was being methodically dismantled by teams of young forensic geneticists, cryptanalysts, and spatial data scientists who did not need his permission to find his victims. His secret world, meticulously constructed and guarded in the dark for 40 years, was being dragged out into the harsh daylight piece by piece. In December 2026, realizing that state prosecutors were preparing additional capital murder indictments in Washington and California that could carry federal death penalty implications, Pendleton's legal defense team requested an emergency meeting with the Oregon Department of Justice. Sitting in the prison visitation room, looking frail, gray, and utterly defeated, the former civil engineer offered a complete, unconditional surrender. In exchange for a guarantee that he would remain in the Oregon State prison system rather than being transferred to a federal death row facility, Pendleton agreed to provide a complete, interactive mapping deposition, identifying every remaining burial site, every unrecovered trophy, and every unrecorded encounter throughout his career. Over the course of 6 grueling days, sitting before federal profilers, state homicide detectives, and forensic anthropologists, Arthur Pendleton unspooled a terrifying, 4-decade narrative of predatory violence. He spoke in his familiar, precise technical voice, analyzing his own horrific crimes as if he were reviewing a set of civil engineering schematics in a municipal board meeting. He detailed how he had studied human movement patterns along public transit routes, how he had used his city truck and official credentials to approach victims without triggering alarm, and how he had drawn immense, sociopathic satisfaction from attending municipal meetings where local officials discussed the very disappearances he had orchestrated. His detailed admissions allowed investigators to clear 3 additional cold case files spanning from 1984 to 2002, providing long overdue answers to families in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California who had spent up to 42 years living in the suffocating hell of the unknown. By the time the deposition concluded, the total number of victims definitively linked to Arthur Pendleton stood at 12. 12 young lives snuffed out by a man who wore a hard hat, carried a clipboard, and held the keys to the city's infrastructure. The formal conclusion of the confessions triggered a historic wave of administrative, legal, and cultural reform across the country. The state of Oregon passed the Rachel Vance Municipal Safety and Institutional Accountability Act, establishing mandatory, independent federal background screening protocols for all public works and infrastructure personnel, stripping qualified immunity from administrators who failed to report predatory behavior, and mandating the permanent digital archiving of all municipal vehicle dispatch logs. The era of the private internal reprimand and the swept-under-the-rug incident report was brought to an absolute, statutory end. In Crestview, as the winter snow began to cover the timberlands around the Blackwood Sawmill Ravine, the town gathered at the newly dedicated Rachel Vance Memorial Sanctuary for a solemn, candlelight vigil. Thousands of citizens, surviving family members, search volunteers, cold case detectives, and local residents stood together in the falling snow, holding small, flickering flames against the mountain dark. There were no speeches by municipal officials, no political declarations, and no remaining secrets haunting the streets. The memory of the soft-spoken engineer who addressed the town hall meeting in 1991 had been erased, replaced by the permanent, radiant memory of Rachel Vance and the 11 other young women whose light had finally pierced through the darkness. The leather handbag left on the cold pavement 35 years earlier had set off a revolution that dismantled an empire of deceit, exposed a monster, and proved to the world that no matter how deep a crime is buried, no matter how powerful the institution that hides it, and no matter how many decades pass in silence, the truth will always rise to claim its absolute, unyielding day in the sun.
Part 5.
The video recordings of Arthur Pendleton's 6-day mapping deposition were delivered behind the heavy, soundproofed doors of the Oregon State Department of Justice, but their release shattered the remaining illusions of safety in small-town America like a sheet of ice falling onto concrete. As national news broadcasts revealed that the silver-haired, retired civil engineer had systematically confessed to 12 murders across 3 states over a 25-year span, the comfortable assumption that civic authority equals personal moral integrity evaporated. The disappearance of Rachel Vance, which had begun as a dark, foggy nightmare behind the Crestview Town Hall on a freezing Tuesday in November 1991, had grown into the single most devastating indictment of municipal oversight and predatory camouflage in modern law enforcement history. The 12 recorded video sessions, totaling over 45 hours of crisp, high-definition footage, were immediately secured inside a federal vault in Washington, D.C. Excerpts played for legislative committees and federal law enforcement boards painted a terrifying portrait of a sociopath who approached human destruction with the cold, clinical precision of a structural engineer checking stress tolerances on a highway bridge. Pendleton described how he had systematically exploited the absolute trust granted to public works officials. He admitted that his position as senior county civil engineer was chosen and maintained precisely because it gave him unrestricted, unquestioned access to municipal maintenance vehicles, city master keys, utility access codes, and late-night infrastructure schedules across multiple county lines without raising eyebrows among police officers or local citizens. "People never look at the man in the yellow high-vis vest carrying a clipboard," Pendleton said with a terrifying, flat detachment during his third interrogation session, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he stared directly into the camera lens. "If a stranger stands in an alley at 9 o'clock at night, people call the police. If I pull up in a white city truck with flashing amber strobes, unlock a utility gate, and stand there with a streetlight blueprint, people wave at me. They thank me for keeping the lights on. That municipal decal on the driver's door wasn't just my job, it was an invisible coat of armor. It allowed me to stand 10 feet away from my victims while the entire town searched for a monster in the woods." The sheer, calculating arrogance of his statements sent shockwaves through state houses and city halls across the nation. In direct response to the multi-state fallout, the United States Department of Transportation, working in conjunction with the Department of Justice, established the National Task Force on Municipal Security and Historical Infrastructure Audit. Federal marshals and independent forensic auditors were dispatched to review the historical personnel records, vehicle tracking logs, and maintenance dispatch files of over 300 municipal public works departments across the Pacific Northwest and Mountain West regions, searching for uninvestigated citizen complaints, altered route logs, and sudden, unexplainable official resignations dating back to 1970. While federal auditors combed through mountain archives of yellowed paper records, state police forensic teams were completing the agonizing, physical work of recovery guided by the precise survey coordinates Pendleton had mapped out during his unconditional surrender. In a deep, rocky ravine near the Wind River in southern Washington, search teams using heavy rigging equipment and specialized mountain rescue units recovered the remains of 21-year-old nursing student Hannah Miller, who had vanished while waiting at a rural bus stop in September 1989. In an abandoned, concrete water-settling basin outside Redding, California, forensic specialists extracted the remains of 19-year-old community college student Allison Park, missing since October 2001. Every single recovery site validated the mathematical, technical precision of the survey mapping data extracted from Pendleton's encrypted ledgers. At every location, search crews recovered personal trinkets, small silver earrings, broken hair clips, engraved keychains that Pendleton had cataloged in his technical notebooks before returning home to attend city planning meetings and sign off on public works budgets. The total recovery of all 12 victims brought an unprecedented, solemn sense of finality to 12 families across the West Coast who would spend up to 42 years living in the suffocating, silent hell of the unknown. For the surviving younger sister of Rachel Vance, who had carried her memory through 35 years of silence, the physical recovery of all the victims, and the permanent incarceration of her sister's killer brought a quiet, heavy peace. On a crisp, sunlit afternoon in late autumn 2026, she stood on the granite steps of the Multnomah County Courthouse, flanked by cold case detectives, forensic geneticists, and the genealogists whose digital detective work had unmasked the engineer. For 35 years, Rachel's sister said, looking out at the sea of news cameras and local citizens gathered on the lawn, our family was told to accept that some mysteries are simply swallowed by the fog. We were told that the rain had washed away the answers, that the timberlands had claimed the secret, and that we should try to move on with our lives. But truth isn't something that can be washed away by coastal fog or buried under pine needles. Truth is patient. It waited in the inner fibers of a nylon cord, it waited in a digital database, and it waited for dedicated people who refused to stop searching. My sister Rachel didn't just leave a legacy of kindness. She left a truth that unmasked a monster and built a shield that will protect thousands of young people walking down city streets tomorrow. The legal fallout from Operation Vaulted Shadow continued to dismantle the old guard of regional municipal management. In December 2026, two former high-ranking public works directors from the Crestview and Salem administrative offices stood before a federal judge in Portland, entering guilty pleas to charges of gross misprision of a felony, official misconduct, and obstruction of justice for their roles in suppressing the 1993 harassment reports against Pendleton. In a landmark ruling that set an uncompromising legal precedent for public administration across the country, the judge sentenced both retired officials to mandatory terms in federal prison, stripping them of their state pensions and permanently revoking their administrative credentials. The judge's closing statement echoed across news broadcasts nationwide. The solemn duty to protect the public is non-negotiable. When public officials choose to protect an administrative reputation or shield a colleague over the physical safety of the citizens they are sworn to serve, they become active accomplices to the atrocities that follow. Let this sentence serve as a permanent warning to every city council, every public works department, and every government agency in America. The era of the private reprimand, the hidden file, and the swept-under-the-rug incident report is permanently dead. In the timber town of Crestview, the physical and emotional landscape was undergoing a permanent, beautiful transformation. The dark alley behind the historic town hall, where Rachel's leather handbag had been found on the cold pavement in 1989, was completely demolished and transformed into the Rachel Vance Memorial Park. The new park featured open green lawns, native Oregon wildflowers, carved stone walkways, and a central bronze sculpture depicting a young woman stepping out of a dark archway into the radiant morning light. At the base of the sculpture was a quiet, continuously flowing granite water feature, etched with the names and ages of all 12 young women recovered during the multi-state investigation. The park instantly became the emotional and spiritual heart of the valley. Every evening, local residents, college students, and visiting families sat on the carved stone benches, listening to the soft murmur of the water feature and watching the sunset cast long, golden rays across the Timber Valley. It was no longer a site associated with fear, suspicion, or municipal shame. It was a sanctuary of memory, endurance, and absolute truth. Back inside his concrete cell at the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem, 68-year-old Arthur Pendleton sat completely stripped of his audience, his professional standing, and his illusion of control. In January 2027, less than 6 months after his transfer to the maximum security facility, Pendleton suffered a sudden, severe medical event, collapsing in his cell from advanced cardiovascular disease. Pronounced dead at 3:10 a.m., the former civil engineer died entirely alone, his body unclaimed by any family member, his remaining financial assets seized by court order to fund the Rachel Vance Victims Compensation and Scholarship Trust. He was buried in an unmarked plot within the prison perimeter, his name permanently erased from state engineering boards, remembered only as a chilling symbol of sociopathic deceit. The death of Arthur Pendleton marked the final, physical conclusion of a 35-year nightmare, but the legacy of the Crestview cold case did not end with his burial. The revolutionary forensic protocols forged during the investigation, combining microscale touch DNA extraction, investigative genetic genealogy, and spatial survey cipher analysis, were permanently integrated into the training curriculum at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. The case of Rachel Vance became the global gold standard for cold case resolution, proving to law enforcement agencies worldwide that no murder is too old, no crime scene is too degraded, and no killer is too well protected by civic authority to escape the ultimate, unyielding reach of modern scientific truth. As the winter of 2027 settled over the Pacific Northwest, bringing cool, fresh rains to the timber slopes of the Cascade Mountains, the town of Crestview stood peaceful, united, and free under the open sky. The streets were brightly lit, college students walked home safely along Oak Street, and the mountain air smelled clean and crisp after the rain. The handbag left on the cold pavement 35 years earlier had set off a revolution that broke through decades of silence, unmasked a monster hiding behind a civil badge, and delivered an unyielding, permanent victory for justice that would illuminate the darkness for generations to come. The death of Arthur Pendleton inside the clinical, sterile confines of the Oregon State Penitentiary Medical Ward brought no sudden halt to the momentum sweeping across the Pacific Northwest. In earlier eras of law enforcement, the death of an incarcerated killer behind iron bars might have served as an official signal to close the thick paper binders, archive the field interview tapes, and return to municipal routine. But by mid-2027, the unraveling of the Crestview cold case had acquired a permanent, unstoppable force. The unearthing of 12 young women across 3 states, combined with the catastrophic exposure of a 30-year institutional cover-up within municipal public works departments, had fundamentally altered the relationship between American citizens, their local governments, and the state agencies sworn to protect them. In direct response to the public outrage generated by Operation Vaulted Shadow, the United States Congress formally introduced and passed the landmark Rachel Vance Municipal Transparency and Forensic Accountability Act of 2027. Signed into federal law with overwhelming bipartisan support, the legislation established strict, non-negotiable standards for every municipal, county, and state department in the nation. Under the new federal mandates, any internal complaint or official grievance alleging predatory, stalker-like, or boundary-crossing behavior by a municipal employee was required to be uploaded within 24 hours to an encrypted, independent federal registry managed directly by state law enforcement oversight divisions. The era of the informal supervisor talk, the unrecorded verbal reprimand, and the quiet lateral transfer that allowed predatory civil servants to move from one county job to another with a clean record was permanently, statutorily destroyed. Department heads who failed to log reports or attempted to handle allegations internally were subject to mandatory federal prison sentences, personal civil liability, and the immediate, permanent revocation of their professional credentials. The invisible coat of armor that had protected Arthur Pendleton for 35 years was completely melted down, forged into an impenetrable legal barrier designed to ensure that no predator could ever again hide behind a high-vis vest, a city vehicle, or a public works badge. While federal legislators codified the lessons of Crestview into national law, the technological engine forged during the hunt for Rachel Vance's killer continued to revolutionize cold case methodology across the globe. The Oregon State Police Forensic Laboratory in Portland expanded its specialized genetic genealogy division, establishing the Rachel Vance Center for Advanced Molecular Identification. Equipped with state-of-the-art robotic microswabbing arrays, high-throughput single-nucleotide polymorphism sequencers, and advanced spatial survey cipher analysis software, the center became a global nerve center for cold case resolution. Forensic geneticists, cold case homicide detectives, and digital data analysts from across Europe, Asia, and South America traveled to Oregon to study the exact protocols used to extract touch DNA from the 35-year-old nylon cord bound around Rachel's wrists. The lab's new methodologies were deployed systematically across the West Coast's vast backlog of historical unsolved crimes. Over an 18-month period, the center successfully extracted viable genetic profiles from degraded evidence stored in climate-controlled vaults since the 1960s and 1970s, yielding breakthrough matches, suspect exclusions, and long-awaited answers in over 50 dormant homicide and missing persons cases across North America. In the timber town of Crestview, the arrival of autumn in 2027 felt fundamentally different than it had for nearly 4 decades. The heavy, suffocating cloud of unanswered questions, communal suspicion, and hidden shame that had hung over the valley since November 12, 1991, had completely dissolved into the crisp, clean mountain air. The town had not forgotten Rachel Vance. Rather, it had embraced her memory as the catalyst for an unyielding, permanent transformation. The Rachel Vance Memorial Park, constructed on the former site of the dark alley behind the historic town hall, had become the vibrant, sunlit heart of the community. The bronze sculpture of the young woman stepping out of a dark archway into the morning light stood proud above the continuously flowing granite water feature, which was illuminated every evening by warm amber floodlights. Etched along the granite basin were the names, ages, and hometowns of all 12 victims recovered during the multi-state investigation: Rachel, Megan, Laura, Sarah, Emily, Hannah, Allison, and the 5 other young women whose families had finally been brought out of the agonizing dark. Every single day, residents of Crestview, college students carrying their backpacks, young families with strollers, off-duty city workers, and elderly citizens who remembered the terrifying fog of 1991, sat on the carved stone benches, listening to the gentle murmur of the water and watching the sunlight filter through the golden leaves of the surrounding maple trees. The site was no longer a location associated with fear or municipal corruption. It had been redeemed as a sanctuary of memory, resilience, and absolute truth. On November 12, 2027, marking precisely 36 years to the day since Rachel Vance stepped out of the municipal center into the mist, a quiet, solemn ceremony was held inside the park. There were no satellite news trucks blocking the streets, no shouting reporters, and no political speeches by local officials. The gathering was small, intimate, and deeply dignified, consisting of the surviving family members of all 12 victims, the cold case detectives who had refused to close the file, the genetic genealogists who had cracked the code, and the citizens of Crestview. As the winter sun set behind the jagged peaks of the Cascade Mountains, casting a brilliant crimson and gold glow across the valley, Rachel's younger sister stepped forward to the edge of the granite water feature. She held a small, polished wooden box containing Rachel's engagement ring, the silver ring with a solitaire diamond setting that Arthur Pendleton had stolen from her finger in 1991 and kept hidden in his mountain cabin for nearly 4 decades before state police recovered it. With gentle, steady hands, her sister placed the silver engagement ring into a secure, glass-encased display built directly into the center of the granite basin, beneath the clear, moving water. For 35 years, her sister said, her voice ringing out clear, steady, and unshakable in the quiet evening air, a monster kept this ring in a cold steel box in his cellar. He thought it was his trophy. He thought it was proof that he was smarter than the law, smarter than this town, and powerful enough to hide his evil forever under a public works vest. But look at where we stand tonight. The monster is dead, buried in an unmarked hole, his name erased from civil engineering boards, remembered only as a coward and a liar. And here is Rachel. Her ring is in the light. Her name is in the light. Her legacy is protecting millions of citizens across this nation every single day. The fog had its moment in 1991, but the light has won forever. One by one, the surviving family members of the other 11 victims stepped forward, laying white roses onto the flowing water around the submerged silver ring, until 12 white blossoms floated together in a glowing circle beneath the autumn sky. There were no tears of despair left to shed, no remaining secrets haunting the dark alleys, and no fear of the shadows that had once gripped the valley. The 36-year nightmare had reached its absolute, ultimate, and eternal close. The lost daughters of the Pacific Northwest had all been brought home, their dignity restored, their names honored, and their memory protected by the unyielding armor of scientific truth and human love. As the quiet stars began to fill the pristine night sky above the Pacific Northwest, the cool mountain breeze rustled through the Douglas firs surrounding Crestview. The evening classes at the local college concluded. Students walked home along well-lit streets under the warm glow of new municipal street lamps, and the town rested in deep, unshakable peace. The leather handbag left on the pavement 36 years earlier had set off a revolution that broke down walls, exposed the dark, and proved to the world that no matter how deep a lie is buried, no matter how powerful the hands that cover it up, the truth will always rise, brilliant and eternal, to claim its day beneath the open sky. The soft rustle of the evening breeze through the newly planted maples surrounding the Rachel Vance Memorial Sanctuary did not signal a fading resolution, but rather the immortal transition of a local tragedy into the permanent cultural, scientific, and legal fabric of the nation. As 2028 dawned over the Pacific Northwest, the profound lessons carved out of the 35-year mystery of Crestview had solidified into an international blueprint for cold case resolution, municipal transparency, and advanced forensic ethics. The narrative that had begun on a dark, fog-drenched street in November 1991 was no longer discussed as an isolated crime or a regional scandal. It had become an indispensable case study taught in law schools, public administration academies, and graduate forensic laboratories across the democratic world. At the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, senior homicide instructors and behavioral scientists formally integrated the Pendleton Investigative Protocol into the permanent training curriculum for federal law enforcement agents. The comprehensive course utilized the 45 hours of recorded mapping depositions, the encrypted survey ledgers, and the historical public works logs of Arthur Pendleton to dismantle the historical, dangerous bias that led investigators to equate professional authority and social standing with moral integrity. Instructors forced trainees to analyze the precise mechanics of Pendleton's camouflage, how he used his status as an award-winning civil engineer, his active participation in civic planning boards, and his authoritative demeanor to deflect suspicion for over 3 decades. The core lesson delivered to future federal investigators was stark, uncompromising, and permanent. A predator's most effective armor is not a weapon or a dark alley, but the unquestioned trust granted to him by an unsuspecting public. The badge of a public servant, the uniform of a municipal worker, or the credentials of a professional engineer confer zero immunity from empirical scrutiny, and no individual, regardless of their official standing, is above the absolute, cold logic of physical evidence. Meanwhile, at the Rachel Vance Center for Advanced Molecular Identification in Portland, the scientific revolution sparked by the 35-year-old nylon cord reached unprecedented technical heights. In early 2028, the laboratory unveiled its revolutionary subcellular genomic extraction array. The technology allowed geneticists to isolate, amplify, and sequence full male and female DNA profiles from as few as 2 microscopic, heavily degraded skin cells trapped on non-porous materials that had been submerged in mud, water, or chemical runoff for over half a century. The deployment of this groundbreaking system triggered a massive avalanche of historical cold case clearances across North America. Evidence lockers in Washington, California, Idaho, and Montana dispatched their most challenging, long-dormant biological samples to the Portland facility. Over an 18-month period, the center successfully extracted complete genetic profiles from items previously deemed scientifically worthless. A rusted utility wrench buried in a mountain culvert since 1973, a faded cotton scarf recovered from a roadside ditch in 1981, and microscopic cellular material extracted from the adhesive backing of an anonymous note mailed to a local newspaper in 1969. In over 70 historical cases, the truth was pulled out of the dark, unmasking long-deceased suspects, exonerating wrongfully accused individuals, and delivering long-overdue finality to families who had carried the crushing weight of the unknown for generations. In the timber town of Crestview, the physical and social landscape had achieved a state of quiet, radiant equilibrium. The community had completely shed the insular fear and paralyzing paranoia that had gripped it since 1991. The local municipal government, once shadowed by the terrifying realization that a serial killer had managed its public works and attended its council meetings, had become a national gold standard for civic transparency and structural accountability. Under the mandates of the federal Rachel Vance Act, Independent citizen oversight boards held permanent, unmonitored access to all municipal personnel logs, vehicle tracking data, and internal grievance reports, ensuring that no administrative official could ever again suppress reports of predatory behavior. The Rachel Vance Memorial Sanctuary, constructed on the former site of the dark alley behind the historic town hall, was thriving. Young students, artists, and community members filled the sunlit stone pathways and outdoor seating areas every evening. The sanctuary was not a somber monument to a night of violence. It was a vibrant, peaceful haven of human connection, community empowerment, and public safety. The memory of Rachel Vance was no longer tied to the cold pavement or the mud of the Blackwood Sawmill Ravine. She was remembered as a brilliant, compassionate young woman whose enduring legacy had built an impenetrable fortress of protection around every citizen who walked down Oak Street. For Rachel's surviving younger sister, who had spent over 3 decades standing in the shadow of her sister's unsolved murder, the year 2028 brought a profound, settled peace. She established the Rachel Vance Foundation for Cold Case Justice, an independent nonprofit organization funded by state compensation settlements and private endowments. The foundation provided direct financial grants to small, rural police departments that lacked the financial resources to perform advanced touch DNA extraction and investigative genetic genealogy on dormant homicide files. Through her foundation's work, over 30 small-town cold cases across the Pacific Northwest were actively reopened, funded, and solved, bringing the same life-changing resolution to other grieving siblings that she had fought so long to achieve. On a crisp, clear evening in late May 2028, as the setting sun painted the snow-capped peaks of the Cascade Mountains in brilliant shades of amber, rose, and gold, Rachel's sister walked slowly through the memorial sanctuary. The air was soft, filled with the sweet scent of blooming clover and the fresh, clean fragrance of the surrounding pine forest. She walked down the carved stone pathway to the granite water basin, watching the clear mountain water cascade smoothly over the etched names of the 12 young women whose lives had been dragged back into the light. She stood beside the basin, looking down through the crystal-clear water at the submerged silver engagement ring, sparkling in the warm amber glow of the underwater lights. She remembered the long, agonizing nights of her youth, the silent living room where her parents had wept holding a framed photograph, and the decades of wondering if the man who took her sister was still walking the streets, driving a city truck, and hiding in plain sight behind a public badge. She reached her hand into the cool water, her fingers gently touching the smooth glass casing surrounding the silver ring. A soft, serene smile touched her lips as she looked up at the vast, open canopy of the Oregon sky, where the first evening stars were beginning to burn with brilliant, piercing clarity. "We brought you home, Rachel," she whispered into the quiet evening breeze, her voice steady, peaceful, and stripped of all remaining grief. "We brought all of you home. The fog is gone, the lies are gone, and the light belongs to you forever." There was no chilling echo in the woods, no shadow lurking behind the municipal badge, and no fear hiding in the heavy coastal mist. There was only the gentle, eternal rhythm of flowing water, the rustle of maple leaves, and the pristine, unshakable peace of a world that had finally been set right. The story of the Crestview cold case was complete. The long, terrifying night had spent its final shadow, the earth had surrendered its secrets, the innocent had been vindicated, and the truth stood supreme, unyielding, invincible, and eternal beneath the open sky. The quiet resolution of the Crestview cold case, sealed beneath the flowing mountain waters of the granite memorial basin and anchored by the enduring sparkle of a silver engagement ring, did not fade into static historical trivia as the calendar turned toward 2029. Instead, the profound institutional, scientific, and human lessons forged from the 35-year tragedy of Rachel Vance continued to radiate across the international legal landscape, fundamentally rewriting how democratic societies confront the dark intersections of municipal authority, predatory camouflage, and long-dormant crimes. In Geneva, Switzerland, the United Nations International Human Rights Council formally convened a special plenary session titled Forensic Genealogy, Municipal Transparency, and the Human Right to Truth. The primary evidence laid before the international delegation of jurists, criminologists, and bioethicists was the complete master file of Operation Vaulted Shadow alongside the forensic archives of the Oregon State Police Cold Case Unit. International legal scholars highlighted the Rachel Vance case as definitive global proof that an unsolved violent crime is not merely an isolated past incident frozen in amber, but an active, ongoing violation of a family's fundamental civil rights, a continuous trauma that persists every single day a perpetrator utilizes civic authority, social standing, or administrative oversight to remain unpunished. The Geneva Assembly formally drafted and ratified the International Accords on Historical Evidence Preservation and Institutional Accountability, an unprecedented global framework mandating that every member nation establish centralized, climate-controlled biological archives for capital case evidence. The Accords stripped away municipal discretion regarding the destruction of physical crime scene materials, declaring that biological trace evidence collected in violent offenses remains the permanent, unalienable property of public justice, immune from local disposal schedules and protected by statutory mandates that require automated retesting whenever new technological thresholds in molecular sequencing are crossed. While international diplomats codified the lessons of Crestview into global human rights policy, the state of Oregon was experiencing a profound, quiet renaissance within its own judicial and administrative systems. The Rachel Vance Center for Advanced Molecular Identification in Portland, operating as an independent scientific research institution completely decoupled from political and law enforcement interference, became a global beacon of forensic innovation. The facility's team of geneticists, molecular biologists, and spatial survey analysts deployed next-generation single-nucleotide polymorphism sequencing arrays to tackle the most notoriously complex, degraded biological samples in North American history. In late 2028, the Portland Center achieved what many forensic pathologists had long considered a mathematical impossibility: extracting a full, pristine male DNA profile from a single microscopic bone fragment that had been exposed to extreme soil acidity and forest fire heat in a remote Cascade timber clearing since 1971. The genetic match identified a long-deceased serial offender who had operated along the Pacific Northwest Highway corridor in the early 1970s, resolving 3 long-dormant cold cases in Northern California and delivering absolute, peaceful finality to families who had spent nearly 60 years living in the suffocating darkness of unanswered questions. The center's extraordinary success rate triggered a massive wave of voluntary historical re-examinations across the United States. Evidence vaults in rural counties from Maine to Alaska sent their most challenging, long-neglected cold case binders to the Portland facility. Over a 12-month period leading into 2029, the lab generated direct genetic matches, suspect exclusions, and actionable investigative leads in over 80 historical homicide and missing persons cases, systematically emptying the forgotten evidence boxes of the 20th century and proving that no killer could rely on the decay of time or the vastness of the wilderness to keep his secrets hidden forever. In the timber town of Crestview, the physical and social landscape had settled into a state of deep, permanent harmony. The town had completely transformed its identity from a community once haunted by a dark, unsolved mystery into a shining national symbol of resilience, radical transparency, and public empowerment. The brownstone storefronts along Oak Street stood bright and welcoming under the clear mountain sky, their windows open to the fresh pine breeze, their sidewalks filled with the sounds of vibrant local commerce and neighborly trust. The Rachel Vance Memorial Sanctuary remained the emotional and spiritual heart of the valley. The bronze sculpture of the young woman stepping out of a dark archway into the morning light, framed by native Oregon flora and the smooth, continuously flowing granite water basin, was maintained with meticulous care by local college students, off-duty first responders, and community elders. Beneath the clear, moving water, the submerged silver engagement ring caught the golden beams of the Pacific Northwest sunlight, sparkling as a perpetual symbol of light reclaimed from the dark. Every year, on the opening day of the regional collegiate track and community service season, young volunteers and students gathered at the sanctuary for a quiet, ceremonial walk around the granite basin before launching their annual projects. The tradition was not one of lingering trauma or fear. It was a celebration of life, community strength, and unwavering integrity, a living declaration that the youth of Oregon walked under the open sky with their heads held high, protected by a society that had refused to let a monster win. For Marcus Vance, the innocent man whose exoneration in his own historical case had helped catalyze the national movement toward advanced forensic retesting, the ultimate resolution of the Pacific Northwest cases provided a profound, quiet sense of validation. Marcus, now living a peaceful, fulfilling life as a master craftsman and advocate for post-conviction justice, maintained a warm, regular correspondence with Rachel's sister. The two, bound by their shared experience of confronting institutional failure and fighting through decades of darkness, stood as living pillars of an era defined by the absolute victory of truth over deceit. On a crisp, clear morning in November 2029, marking precisely 38 years since Rachel Vance stepped out of the municipal center and into the autumn fog, a simple, unannounced gathering took place inside the memorial sanctuary. A small group of retired detectives, state police forensic geneticists, cold case prosecutors, and the surviving family members of all 12 victims stood together around the glowing granite basin. As the gentle morning mist rolled off the timber slopes of the Cascade Mountains, carrying the clean, resinous scent of Douglas fir across the park, Rachel's sister stepped forward and placed a single white rose onto the flowing water. One by one, the other families stepped forward, laying 11 more roses beside the first, until 12 white blossoms floated together in a serene, perfect circle above the submerged silver engagement ring. There were no speeches, no television cameras, and no remaining shadows hanging over the valley. The long, agonizing night that had begun on a fog-drenched pavement in 1991 had spent its absolute last breath. The truth, pursued through 35 years of silence by scientists who refused to give up, detectives who refused to close the file, and a family that never lost faith, stood triumphant, unyielding, and permanent beneath the open sky. The cold case was solved, the records were corrected, the innocent were honored, and the truth reigned supreme, forever illuminating the night. The arrival of 2030 over the Pacific Northwest brought with it a crystalline, golden light that washed across the timber slopes of the Cascade Mountains, casting long, warm reflections over the quiet waters of Pine Creek and the valley of Crestview. The 4 decades that had passed since Rachel Vance stepped off a well-lit sidewalk into a blinding autumn fog were no longer remembered as an era of unsolved horror or municipal shame. The long, terrifying dark that had once frozen an entire valley in fear, suspicion, and insular silence had completely dissolved, replaced by an unshakable institutional reality that reverberated across the global legal landscape. What had begun as a localized tragedy on a fog-drenched pavement behind a small-town municipal building had achieved its absolute, eternal transformation into an immortal blueprint for moral courage, scientific precision, and radical civic transparency. In Salem, the Oregon State Legislature marked the opening session of the new decade by unanimously passing the Rachel Vance Judicial and Municipal Integrity Mandate. The landmark statutory package, drafted jointly by constitutional scholars, civil rights attorneys, forensic geneticists, and the surviving family members of the 12 victims, established an unprecedented national model for administrative and judicial oversight. Under its strict legal provisions, any attempt by a public official, city engineer, or law enforcement officer to conceal, alter, delay, or fail to log evidence of predatory behavior or violent crime was reclassified as an unpardonable felony carrying mandatory, non-negotiable state prison sentences. The law permanently stripped away qualified immunity for public servants who engaged in deliberate investigative obstruction or administrative concealment, ensuring that the heavy iron shield Charles Callahan, Raymond Driscoll, Arthur Pendleton, and corrupt public works administrators had relied upon for decades was shattered forever. The era of the swept-under-the-rug reprimand, the private executive session, and the unrecorded transfer was permanently buried, replaced by an open, automated digital ledger where every grievance, every report, and every forensic log was preserved in real time on encrypted, tamper-proof state networks. At the Rachel Vance Center for Advanced Molecular Identification in Portland, the quiet, methodical work of scientific extraction had evolved into an international research engine. The center's ultra-clean laboratories and high-throughput robotic liquid handlers operated around the clock, processing degraded biological samples sent by law enforcement agencies from across 5 continents. The facility's team of geneticists and bioinformaticians achieved scientific breakthroughs that previous generations of pathologists considered pure fantasy, extracting full, actionable genomic profiles from microscopic skin cells trapped on 50-year-old fabric fibers, degraded bone fragments, and water-damaged paper records without damaging or consuming the original physical evidence. The center's director, standing before a visiting delegation of international forensic scientists and judicial ministers in May 2030, gestured toward a glass-walled cleanroom where robotic arms were carefully manipulating microcentrifuges. "What you are witnessing here," she explained, her voice echoing through the sterile, climate-controlled corridor, "is the absolute death of the cold case as a concept." In the 20th century, time was the killer's best friend. Every year that passed faded human memory, degraded physical evidence, and allowed corrupt power structures to solidify their lies. In the 21st century, time is the absolute ally of truth. The older a sample gets, the more advanced our extraction algorithms become. We are no longer limited by what the human eye can see or what original crime scene texts could isolate with cotton swabs. We can read the microscopic history left behind on a thread of wool, a knot of nylon cord, a rusted lock, or a blade of grass. There is no longer any corner of the physical world where a predator can hide his identity forever. In Crestview, the quiet streets around Main Street and the former municipal building had settled into a serene, vibrant rhythm of renewal and trust. The old 3-story brownstones, once shadowed by the terrifying mystery of an unpunished monster walking their sidewalks, stood bright and welcoming against the blue mountain sky. The historic insularity that had once bred fear and protected corrupt local bosses was completely gone, replaced by an open, active community culture that celebrated student empowerment, civic responsibility, and mutual care. The Rachel Vance Memorial Sanctuary remained the spiritual and emotional heart of the entire valley. The circular granite water basin, filled with continuously flowing mountain water and carved with the names, ages, and hometowns of all 12 lost daughters, was a place of quiet reverence, living beauty, and absolute vindication. Beneath the clear, moving water, the restored silver engagement ring engraved with the initials RV glowed beneath amber floodlights, a sparkling symbol of light reclaimed from the dark. The park was meticulously maintained by neighborhood volunteers, local college students, off-duty firefighters, and visiting legal scholars, ensuring that the sanctuary remained pristine every day of the year. On a warm, golden afternoon in June 2030, a private graduation ceremony was held inside the sanctuary for the first class of recipients of the Rachel Vance Arts and Science Scholarship Fund. 12 bright, dedicated young women from working-class Oregon timber towns stood beside the flowing water, holding their diplomas and wearing their academic sashes, surrounded by their proud families and community leaders. Rachel's silver-haired sister stood at the podium, looking out at the young women who carried her sister's name into the future. 39 years ago, she told the crowd, her voice ringing out clear, steady, and resonant across the quiet park, a monster thought he could extinguish my sister's light in a dark fog just 6 blocks from where we are standing today. He thought that by taking her life, stealing her engagement ring, and using his position as a public servant to cover up his crimes, he had erased her from this world. But look around you today. Look at this park. Look at these 12 brilliant young women standing here, ready to step into universities, research labs, and civic halls to build a safer, more honest world. The monster who took her is gone, buried in an unmarked hole, forgotten, unloved, and despised. But Rachel is here. She lives in every student who stands up for justice, every scientist who searches for the truth, and every human heart that refuses to stay silent in the face of wrong. As the crowd erupted in warm applause, the young graduates stepped forward one by one, laying white roses gently onto the flowing water around the submerged silver ring before taking their professional and academic pledges. It was a moment of complete, poetic triumph, a living, breathing declaration that the violence of November 1991 had failed to destroy the future and that the light of a single innocent life, defended by love, courage, and scientific truth, could outshine 40 years of institutional blindness and sociopathic cruelty. In his quiet home on the rural outskirts of the county, miles away from the city traffic, Marcus Vance spent the quiet summer evening sitting on his wooden front porch, holding a warm cup of tea and watching the sunset paint the Oregon sky in deep shades of gold, amber, and violet. At 59 years old, Marcus was the picture of absolute, unshakable peace. His foundation had expanded its operations into a national powerhouse of judicial reform and forensic funding, having secured the exoneration and freedom of over 25 wrongfully convicted men and women, restoring their names, their dignity, and their futures. Marcus looked out across the green, sunlit fields stretching toward the mountain horizon. He thought back over his long, miraculous life, from the dark, terrifying interrogation room where he had been broken as a young man, through 25 years of solitude behind steel bars, to the miraculous day the truth broke open the doors and gave him back his freedom. He felt no shadow of bitterness, no lingering anger, and no regret for the long, hard road he had walked. He knew that his suffering had not been in vain. It had been the catalyst that tore down a broken, protective system and built a new world where no innocent person would ever have to suffer in silence again. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of deep crimson and purple, Marcus smiled softly into the quiet night. He was a man who was entirely, unconditionally free, a living monument to the eternal truth that no matter how deep a lie is buried, no matter how long an innocent person suffers in the dark, the light will always, inevitably, find its way home. The long, extraordinary story of the Oregon 1991 cold case had reached its absolute, eternal close. The tracks were quiet, the graves were cleared, the innocent were free, the corrupt were judged, and the truth reigned supreme, unyielding, eternal, and beautiful beneath the open sky. By the autumn of 2030, the global reverberations of the Crestview cold case breakthrough had settled into a permanent, bedrock reality across the international legal, municipal, and educational landscape. The long, dark night that began on a frozen, fog-drenched pavement behind the municipal building 39 years earlier had spent its absolute last shadow. What was once a localized, terrifying mystery, a vibrant college student bludgeoned, bound, and discarded in the Blackwood Sawmill Ravine while a soft-spoken civil engineer addressed town hall meetings, had evolved into the defining catalyst for a global revolution in forensic genetics, public administrative oversight, and civic accountability. The story of Rachel Vance, Arthur Pendleton, and the 11 other young women whose lives he had stolen was no longer an open wound or an active investigation. It had become an immortal monument to the triumph of empirical truth over entrenched human authority. At the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, headquarters in Paris, the International Steering Committee formally inaugurated the Rachel Vance Global Archive for Municipal Safety and Forensic Accountability. The digital repository, linked directly to the cloud infrastructure of the Rachel Vance Center for Advanced Molecular Identification in Portland, served as a centralized, encrypted database designed to assist developing nations in auditing historical institutional crimes, processing unidentified human remains, and resolving cold case disappearances using low-copy touch DNA analysis and genetic genealogy. Forensic delegations from across the globe traveled to Oregon to train under the very geneticists who had extracted Arthur Pendleton's microscopic skin cells from the degraded fibers of a 35-year-old nylon cord. The central thesis taught to these international researchers was rooted in what scholars called the Crestview imperative, the absolute, uncompromising principle that no piece of physical evidence ever loses its voice, and that human authority can only delay justice, never destroy it. The physical world, the instructors demonstrated, possesses an indelible memory. The soil, the cloth, the rusted metal of a utility vault, and the microscopic cells clinging to an old piece of nylon cord all retain the immutable record of what transpired. The The sacred duty of modern law enforcement was simply to maintain absolute scientific integrity until technology advanced enough to read that record clearly. In the United States, the Department of Justice published its comprehensive retrospective report on the nationwide implementation of the Rachel Vance Municipal Safety and Forensic Accountability Act. The data presented to Congress was nothing short of miraculous. Across all 50 states, the rate of cold case clearances involving violent capital offenses had increased by more than 600% over a 4-year period. More than 100 historical wrongful convictions had been systematically overturned following mandatory independent audits of 20th-century evidence lockers, restoring freedom to innocent individuals who had been broken by coercive interrogations and tunnel-visioned investigations. Furthermore, the federal report confirmed that institutional cover-ups of the scale orchestrated by Arthur Pendleton's public works directors and former municipal officials were now functionally impossible under modern statutory protocols. With mandatory digital logging of every citizen grievance, automated chain of custody tracking via blockchain ledgers, and universal mandatory video recording of all custodial interactions, the dark, unrecorded administrative offices where desperate officials once manufactured false narratives had been permanently eliminated from the American legal system. In Crestview, the quiet, mountain timber town had fully embraced its identity as a sanctuary of justice, memory, and community strength. The brownstones along Oak Street, once shadowed by the terrifying phantom of an unpunished predator walking their sidewalks, stood proud and sunlit against the crisp mountain air. The neighborhood had broken its historic wall of insular silence, replacing mistrust with a deep, active commitment to civic transparency. Local youth organizations, student councils, and public agencies regularly organized educational walks through the Rachel Vance Memorial Sanctuary, teaching young residents that true loyalty to one's town means demanding integrity from those in power and standing unyielding alongside the vulnerable. The sanctuary itself had matured into a breathtaking urban haven. The maple and birch trees planted around the perimeter had grown tall and full, their rustling leaves creating a gentle, soothing canopy over the smooth granite basin. The continuously flowing mountain water, reflecting the bright blue sky above, washed gently over the carved names of all 12 young women: Rachel, Megan, Laura, Sarah, Emily, Hannah, Allison, and the 5 other daughters restored to their families. On any given day, people from all walks of life, college students carrying textbooks, visiting legal scholars, elderly residents, and young families, could be found sitting quietly on the carved stone benches, drawing a profound sense of inspiration and peace from the serene surroundings. In October 2030, a quiet, unannounced ceremony took place at the sanctuary to mark the formal opening of the Rachel Vance Youth Empowerment and Advocacy Center, located directly adjacent to the memorial grounds. Funded by state grants and private donations, the facility provided free counseling, academic tutoring, legal support, and leadership training to teenagers and young adults throughout the Pacific Northwest. Rachel's silver-haired sister, standing beside the cold case detectives whose relentless work had broken the 35-year silence, cut the ribbon to open the doors. When Rachel walked down Oak Street 39 years ago, her sister told the assembled crowd of neighbors and students she was carrying her volunteer craft supplies, dreaming of a life dedicated to service, family, and helping others. A cruel, arrogant man who wore a civil servant's vest thought he could stop her dream in the fog. He thought he could bury her voice under a pile of pine needles in the Blackwood Sawmill Ravine. But look across the street today. Her name is on this building. Her spirit is inside these classrooms. Her life is continuing to protect and empower thousands of young people long after her killer's name has been erased from the earth. Love didn't just win the legal battle. Love won the war. In his quiet rural sanctuary miles away from the city noise, Marcus Vance spent the calm, autumn evening sitting beside a crackling stone fireplace in his workshop, turning the pages of an architectural blueprint for a new vocational training center his foundation was building for exonerated citizens. At 59 years old, Marcus carried himself with the quiet, effortless grace of a man who had conquered the deepest darkness human nature could offer and stepped fully into the light. He had spent his day working on the engine of a classic roadster, his hands calloused and steady, his mind completely clear of any bitterness or regret. He walked to the window of his workshop, looking out at the calm, moonlit fields stretching toward the distant mountain treeline. He thought of the long, extraordinary journey that had linked his life to a young community volunteer in Crestview, how the microscopic skin cells under a cord had freed him from wrongful imprisonment, dismantled a multi-state serial predator, and torn down an empire of municipal cover-ups. He realized that his suffering had not been a random, meaningless tragedy. It had been the crucible out of which a brighter, more honest world was forged. Marcus took a deep, peaceful breath, feeling the cool night air filtering through the open window frame. He knew that the past was unchangeable, but he also knew that the future was boundless, wide open, and filled with infinite light. He closed his eyes for a moment, sending a quiet, wordless thought of gratitude into the quiet night, for the scientists who refused to give up, for the detectives who fought for truth, for the genealogists who cracked the code, and for the brave young woman whose memory had saved so many lives. The long, extraordinary story of the Oregon 1991 cold case had reached its absolute, ultimate, and eternal close. It stands forever written in the stars and carved into the granite of human memory, a timeless testament to the unyielding power of love over hatred, the invincible strength of scientific truth over human deceit, and the eternal light of justice that no shadow on earth can ever extinguish. The cold case was solved, the records were perfected, the innocent were free, and the truth reigned supreme, permanent and unyielding beneath the open sky. The arrival of 2031 over the timber slopes of the Pacific Northwest carried an unshakable, luminous stillness that settled over the mountain valleys of Oregon. Decades had passed since that fog-drenched autumn night in 1991 when 21-year-old Rachel Vance locked the municipal center doors, stepped into the mist, and vanished into the shadows of Crestview. The long, terrifying years of corrupt silence, hidden administrative files, and swept-under-the-rug warnings were no longer active wounds. They had been transformed into the foundational pillars of an unprecedented global institutional renaissance. The nightmare that had once frozen an entire timber town in fear had achieved its permanent, transcendent evolution, a living, breathing monument to moral fortitude, scientific precision, and absolute judicial accountability. Across the international academic landscape, the case of Arthur Pendleton and the ultimate resolution of the Crestview cold case had transcended the traditional boundaries of criminal justice and forensic pathology. At leading research universities from Oxford to the University of Tokyo, the multi-decade investigation was formally integrated into advanced doctoral programs covering public ethics, organizational psychology, and structural sociology. Professors assigned the complete, unedited archives of Operation Vaulted Shadow to illustrate how an insular municipal power structure can manipulate public trust to protect its reputation, and how the relentless, unyielding application of empirical science can systematically dismantle even the most deeply entrenched machinery of institutional cover-ups. Criminologists and legal scholars coined the term the Crestview imperative to describe the inevitable, historical collapse of human deceit when confronted by modern forensic genetics. The lesson delivered to this new generation of global leaders was stark and uncompromising. No social prestige is elevated enough to permanently suppress physical reality. No civil engineering badge grants immunity from the laws of nature, and no amount of past time can erase the biological signature left behind by a predator. The story of Rachel Vance, Arthur Pendleton, and the 11 forgotten daughters of the West Coast had become an eternal warning to authority figures everywhere that every lie told to protect an institution carries an inescapable expiration date. In Washington, D.C., the United States Department of Justice marked the 5-year anniversary of the Rachel Vance Municipal Safety and Forensic Accountability Act by releasing its comprehensive national impact audit. The statistics presented to Congress demonstrated a historic, permanent shift in the American legal system. Under the strict federal mandates requiring automated blockchain tracking of all municipal worker grievances and mandatory, unedited video recording of all custodial interactions, Administrative cover-ups involving predatory behavior in public agencies had dropped to absolute zero nationwide. Simultaneously, the integration of high-throughput touch DNA extraction and advanced genetic genealogy protocols had enabled law enforcement agencies across all 50 states to resolve over 1,400 historical cold cases, bringing long overdue answers to families whose loved ones had vanished during the 20th century. At the Rachel Vance Center for Advanced Molecular Identification in Portland, research geneticists achieved yet another monumental milestone in molecular diagnostics. The lab introduced a revolutionary, non-destructive cellular isolation protocol that allowed scientists to extract full, pristine genomic profiles from microscopic biological samples without altering or consuming the underlying physical evidence. This breakthrough meant that archived evidence files from ancient cold cases could be analyzed repeatedly across future generations without fear of depleting the original material. The Portland Center, once a regional crime lab, was now recognized as the global capital of cold case genetics, hosting international research delegations and setting the scientific gold standard for historical evidence analysis. In Crestview, the quiet streets surrounding Main Street and the former municipal center had settled into a serene, vibrant rhythm of life and renewal. The old three-story brownstones, once shadowed by the terrifying mystery of an unpunished monster walking their sidewalks, stood bright and welcoming against the blue mountain sky. The historic insularity that had once bred silence and protected corrupt local bosses was completely gone, replaced by an open, active community culture that celebrated transparency, civic responsibility, and mutual support. The Rachel Vance Memorial Sanctuary at the site of the old alley remained the spiritual and emotional heart of the neighborhood. The circular granite basin, filled with continuously flowing mountain water and carved with the names of all 12 lost daughters, was a place of quiet reverence and living beauty. Beneath the moving water, the restored silver engagement ring engraved with the initials RV glowed beneath amber floodlights, a sparkling symbol of light reclaimed from the dark. The park was meticulously maintained by neighborhood volunteers, local college students, and off-duty first responders, ensuring that the space remained pristine every day of the year. On a warm evening in late May 2031, a special gathering took place inside the park to mark the formal dedication of the Lynn Vance International Center for Civil Liberties, constructed directly adjacent to the memorial grounds. The new facility housed a world-class legal research library, a post-conviction advocacy clinic, and a permanent museum documenting the history of wrongful convictions and forensic advances in North America. The opening ceremony brought together civil rights leaders, exonerated citizens, forensic scientists, and local residents from across New England and the Pacific Northwest. Advocates for the victims stood together at the lectern, looking out over the crowded sanctuary. Rachel's silver-haired sister stepped forward, her face carrying a deep, serene calm, her voice echoing clear and resonant across the quiet mountain avenue. 40 years ago, she told the quiet crowd, my sister Rachel was taken from us in a dark fog just 3 blocks from where we are standing tonight. The man who took her life and the administrators who covered up the warning signs believed that power, position, and professional standing gave them the right to treat human lives like disposable trash. They thought that because they controlled the municipal logs, the public work schedules, and the community meetings, the truth would die in the mud along with my sister. But look at what stands here tonight. Look at this park. Look at this center. Look at the thousands of lives that have been saved, freed, and healed because we refused to let her memory be buried. She paused, looking down at the clear, flowing water of the granite basin where white roses floated gently around the submerged silver engagement ring. The men who did this thought they were building an empire of power, she continued softly. In the end, they died in shame, alone in prison cells, their names erased from the public record, remembered only as cowards and monsters. But Rachel's name is written in granite. Her spirit is alive in every citizen who stands up for truth, every scientist who searches for the facts, and every human being who stands up against corruption. The darkness had its moment in 1991, but the light has won forever. As the crowd applauded, a brass ensemble played a soft, moving melody that floated out over the calm waters of Crestview, blending with the gentle rustle of maple leaves and the cool mountain breeze. It was a moment of absolute, poetic completion, a living testament to the fact that no act of violence, no matter how brutal, and no cover-up, no matter how powerful, can ever extinguish the light of an innocent soul defended by love, truth, and unyielding courage. In his quiet home on the rural outskirts of the county, miles away from the city noise, Marcus Vance spent the quiet summer evening sitting on his wooden front porch, holding a warm cup of coffee and listening to the soft evening wind through the tall maple trees. At 59 years old, Marcus was the picture of absolute, unshakable peace. His foundation had expanded its operations into a national powerhouse of judicial reform, having secured the exoneration and freedom of 25 wrongfully convicted men and women, restoring their names, their dignity, and their futures. Marcus looked out across the green, sunlit fields stretching toward the horizon. He thought back over his long, miraculous life, from the dark, terrifying interrogation room in 1998 where he had been forced to sign a lie, through 25 years of solitude behind steel bars, to the miraculous day the truth broke open the doors and gave him back his freedom. He felt no shadow of bitterness, no lingering anger, and no regret for the long, hard road he had walked. He knew that his suffering had not been in vain. It had been the catalyst that tore down a broken system and built a new world where no innocent person would ever have to suffer in silence again. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of gold, amber, and deep violet, Marcus smiled softly into the quiet night. He was a man who was entirely, unconditionally free, a living monument to the eternal truth that no matter how deep a lie is buried, no matter how long an innocent person suffers in the dark, the light will always, inevitably, find its way home. The long, extraordinary story of the Crestview cold case was finished. The tracks were quiet, the graves were cleared, the innocent were free, the corrupt were judged, and the truth reigned supreme, unyielding, eternal, and beautiful beneath the open sky. The passage of time across the Pacific Northwest in the early months of 2032 carried no lingering specters of unresolved tragedy, only the quiet, majestic weight of an absolute, permanent resolution. As the winter sun climbed over the timber slopes of the Cascade Mountains, casting long, golden beams across the polished stone of the Rachel Vance Memorial Sanctuary, the narrative of the 1991 cold case had moved beyond the realm of human memory and entered the immortal domain of historical law. The long, terrifying storm that had begun with a sudden ambush in a fog-drenched alley 41 years earlier had spent its very last breath. What remained in its wake was not a landscape marred by administrative corruption and fear, but a living, breathing testament to the invincible power of empirical truth, human endurance, and scientific precision. Across the United States and throughout international judicial forums, the year 2032 marked the formal codification of the Crestview Accords on Municipal and Forensic Integrity. The international treaty, ratified by 48 sovereign nations, established a binding global standard for the long-term archiving, digital sequencing, and nonpartisan analysis of biological evidence in violent capital crimes, alongside mandatory oversight for public infrastructure departments. The core doctrine of the Accords was derived directly from the breakthroughs that had freed Marcus Vance and brought down the corrupt infrastructures built around predators who hid behind civic credentials. The absolute, unshakable principle that physical evidence collected at a crime scene is the unalienable property of the public record, immune from municipal destruction schedules, political interference, or administrative discretion. Under the new global protocol, state and national crime laboratories were permanently severed from law enforcement and municipal departmental oversight, operating as completely independent, scientific research institutions bound by sacred oaths of empirical neutrality. The practice of city managers or local police precinct commanders deciding which citizen grievances to file, which evidence files to test, and which files to quietly archive in damp basements was designated an international crime against justice. Microscopic touch DNA, single nucleotide polymorphism sequencing, and advanced genetic genealogy were formally recognized as non-negotiable instruments of human rights, ensuring that no future generation of predators could ever again use the passage of time, professional prestige, or the shield of local authority to hide their crimes in the dark. In Portland, the Rachel Vance Center for Advanced Molecular Identification had expanded into a world-renowned campus of scientific discovery. The facility's ultra-clean laboratories and high-throughput robotic liquid handlers operated around the clock, processing biological materials from long-dormant case files sent by law enforcement agencies across 6 continents. The center's bioinformatic algorithms achieved unprecedented analytical feats, successfully isolating complete genomic profiles from microscopic skin cells trapped on 60-year-old fabric fibers, degraded bone fragments, and water-damaged paper records. Over a 12-month period leading into mid-2032, the Portland Center had generated direct genetic hits and suspect clearances in over 100 historical cold case investigations, systematically emptying the dusty evidence vaults of the 20th century and delivering long overdue answers to families who had spent decades waiting in the dark. In Crestview, the physical and cultural landscape had matured into a shining model of civic redemption. The neighborhood around Main Street and the former municipal center, once shadowed by an insular culture of silence that allowed corrupt public works bosses to operate unchecked, had become a vibrant sanctuary of community transparency and open governance. The brownstone storefronts stood bright against the mountain morning air, their windows open to the pine breeze, their sidewalks filled with the sounds of children playing and neighbors greeting one another with quiet, genuine warmth. The Rachel Vance Memorial Sanctuary stood as the quiet, glowing heart of the entire district. The circular granite basin, with its continuously flowing mountain water and carved names of all 12 lost daughters, was meticulously tended by local volunteers, college students, and neighborhood elders. Beneath the clear, moving water, the restored silver engagement ring engraved with the initials RV caught the morning sunlight, sparkling like a submerged diamond at the center of the white stone monument. The sanctuary was no longer a place where people came to mourn a horrific crime. It had become a sacred space of quiet reflection, hope, and absolute vindication, a place where future prosecutors, civil engineers, and human rights advocates came to learn that the true measure of a society's strength lies in its relentless, uncompromising pursuit of the truth. On a warm, golden afternoon in June 2032, the Rachel Vance Youth Empowerment and Advocacy Center celebrated its 2nd anniversary. The facility, which provided free counseling, academic tutoring, legal support, and leadership training to teenagers across the Pacific Northwest, had served over 10,000 students since opening its doors. Rachel's silver-haired sister stood on the front steps of the center alongside the cold case detectives whose relentless work had set off the avalanche in 2026. Looking out over the crowd of community health workers, local residents, and young students, her face radiated a deep, unshakable peace. 41 years ago, she said, her voice echoing clear and strong across the sunlit avenue, a cruel, arrogant man thought he could extinguish my sister's voice in a dark fog. He thought that by taking her life, stealing her engagement ring, and using his position as a public servant to cover up his crime,